I was adjusting my tie in the mirror, getting ready to drive to my daughter's house for what I believed was a simple family dinner. A small check rested in my pocket, something I'd saved just to make her happy. Then my phone buzzed. It wasn't my daughter. It was my lawyer. His message made my stomach drop. "Don't go to your daughter's house. Call me immediately." I dialed his number without hesitation. What he told me next about my own daughter shattered everything I thought I knew. "Thank you so much for being here. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because this story began the moment I picked up that phone and realized something wasn't right. Also, just a quick note. Parts of this story have been lightly dramatized for storytelling and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people or places is purely coincidental, but the message behind it is completely real. The silence in my small rental home in South Boston was usually comforting, but tonight it felt suffocating. I looked at the photograph of my late wife, Catherine, on the dresser. Her eyes were warm and full of the love we had shared for 40 years. I spoke to her picture softly. "Catherine, you were right. We spoiled her. We protected her too much." I looked at my reflection. A 71-year-old man with thinning gray hair and a suit that was 10 years out of fashion. To the outside world, I was Joseph Bennett, a retired engineer living on Social Security and a small pension. I drove a 15-year-old Ford truck. I clipped coupons for the grocery store. I lived in a modest 2-bedroom house that needed a fresh coat of paint. That was the image I had carefully cultivated. That was the father Sarah thought she knew. I touched the pocket of my jacket, feeling the envelope with the check. $500. I had skipped buying heating oil this month to write that check. Or at least that is what I had told Sarah on the phone last week when she complained about the cost of her daughter's ballet lessons. I wanted them to think I was stretching every penny for them. It was a test, I suppose. A test they had been failing for years, but I refused to see it until this very moment. The vibration of the phone on the wood surface startled me again. I picked it up. It was Richard. I pressed the green button and brought it to my ear. "Joseph." "Listen to me very carefully," Richard said. His voice was not the calm, measured tone of the lawyer I had known for 3 decades. It was urgent, breathless. He sounded like a man who had run up a flight of stairs. "I am at the courthouse. I have a friend in the family division clerk office. He just flagged a file that came across his desk an hour ago. It is an ex parte motion for emergency temporary conservatorship. The petitioner is Sarah Bennett Miller. The respondent is Joseph Bennett." I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. The springs creaked under my weight. Conservatorship. I knew what that word meant. It meant losing the right to sign a check. It meant losing the right to choose where I lived. It meant I would legally become a child in the eyes of the state, and my daughter would be my warden. "On what grounds?" Richard, I asked. My voice was steady, but my hand was gripping the bedsheet so hard, my knuckles were white. "Dementia," Richard replied. "They have submitted an affidavit claiming you have shown rapid cognitive decline. They claim you leave the stove on. They claim you get lost driving to the grocery store. They claim you are a danger to yourself and your finances. They are asking for immediate control of your assets to prevent you from squandering your remaining funds." Squandering. The word tasted like bile. I lived on less than $2,000 a month. I had not bought a new suit since Catherine S.'s funeral. "There is more," Joseph Richard continued. "The hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9. But the motion mentions a medical evaluation that is supposed to happen tonight. They have listed a Dr. Aris as the evaluating physician. Is there a doctor coming to this dinner? I thought back to the phone call with Michael, my son-in-law, yesterday. He had been so casual, so friendly. He said he invited an old college friend who was in town, a guy named Aris, just for drinks and cake, he had said. "My God," I whispered. "It is an ambush. It is a forensic evaluation disguised as a birthday party, Richard confirmed. If you go there and you act confused, or if you have a glass of wine and get sleepy, this doctor will sign a statement tonight. By tomorrow morning, the police will be at your door to escort you to a facility while they liquidate your house. Joseph, do not go. Stay home. I will come over and we can fight this in the morning. I looked at the check in my pocket. I looked at the photo of Catherine. I thought about the tuition payments I had secretly made for Sarah's college so she would not graduate with debt. I thought about the $50,000 I had given Michael 10 years ago for that startup business that vanished in 6 months. I had played the role of the supportive father, the safety net, the rock, and this was my reward, to be discarded like broken machinery. No, Richard, I said. I stood up. The stiffness in my knees seemed to vanish, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I am going. Joseph? Are you insane? If they get that signature, they won't get what they expect, I interrupted. I need to know why. I need to look them in the eye and see it for myself. If I stay home, they will just try again next week. I need to hear them say it. I need evidence. You need protection, Richard argued. I have protection, I said, walking toward my closet. I opened the heavy wooden trunk at the bottom. Inside, among old blueprints and tools, sat a small black box. It was a high-fidelity digital voice recorder I used to use for site inspections. Small, discreet, and powerful. I checked the battery. Full. I am going to record everything, Richard. Every word. Every lie. Be careful, Joseph. Richard warned, his voice low. If they sense you are suspicious, they might escalate. These people are desperate. People do not file for emergency conservatorship unless they are in deep financial trouble and need access to cash fast. I hung up the phone. I clipped the recorder inside my jacket pocket just behind my handkerchief. I tested it. It picked up the sound of my breathing. Perfect. I looked around my bedroom one last time. It was simple. Clean. Honest. Unlike the house I was about to enter. I put on my overcoat, wrapped my scarf around my neck, and walked out into the biting Boston wind. The cold air hit my face, but I barely felt it. The ice in my heart was colder. The drive to Sarah's house in Wellesley took 40 minutes. I drove my old truck, staying exactly at the speed limit. I watched the neighborhoods change from the working-class triple-deckers of my area to the sprawling, manicured lawns of the wealthy suburbs. Sarah and Michael lived in a colonial-style McMansion that was worth at least $2.5 million. It had a 3-car garage and a heated driveway. They drove leased luxury cars. They went on vacations to Europe. To the outside world, they were the picture of success. But I knew better. You do not try to lock up your father unless the wolves are at the door. I pulled into the driveway. It was crowded. There was Michael's Range Rover, Sarah's Mercedes, and a black sedan I did not recognize. That must be the doctor, I thought. I took a deep breath. I patted my pocket to ensure the recorder was on. Then I hunched my shoulders slightly. I relaxed my facial muscles to look a little slacker, a little less focused. I shuffled my feet as I walked to the door. If they wanted a senile old man, I would give them a performance that would make them confident. Arrogance causes mistakes, and I needed them to make mistakes. Michael opened the door before I could ring the bell. He was wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. He had a glass of scotch in his hand. "Joseph!" He boomed, his voice too loud, as if he were talking to someone hard of hearing. "You made it. We were starting to get worried." "Did you get lost on the way?" The gaslighting started immediately. I had driven to this house 100 times. I had never been lost. No, Michael. I said, letting my voice quaver just a bit. The traffic was bad on the I-90. I got a little turned around at the exit, but I found it. Michael exchanged a quick glance with Sarah, who was standing in the hallway. It was a look of satisfaction. See, he is already admitting he is confused. "Come in, Dad," Sarah said. She gave me a hug, but her body was rigid. She smelled of expensive perfume and wine. "Put your coat here." "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said, handing her the card with the check. "Oh, Dad, you shouldn't have," she said, taking it without looking at me. She placed it on the side table without opening it. A $500 gift from a pensioner, and she treated it like junk mail. "Come into the living room." Michael guided me with a hand on my back, pushing me slightly. "I want you to meet a friend of mine. This is Dr. Aris." The man sitting on the white sofa stood up. He was in his 50s, wearing a sharp suit and wire-rimmed glasses. He had the cold, analytical eyes of a shark. "Mr. Bennett," he said, extending a hand. "Michael has told me so much about you." I shook his hand. His grip was firm testing. "Nice to meet you," I mumbled, looking slightly past his ear, avoiding direct eye contact. "Please sit," Dr. Aris said, patting the spot next to him. "Michael tells me you used to be an engineer. That must have been fascinating work." "It was a long time ago," I said, sinking into the soft cushions. I tried to look small. I kept my hands on my knees and let a slight tremor shake my left hand. "I built bridges." "Do you remember which ones?" Dr. Aris asked. His tone was casual, but the pen in his hand was poised over a small notebook on the coffee table. I think I worked on the Zakim Bridge," I said, slowly furrowing my brow as if the memory was swimming through fog. "But maybe that was the other one. It gets hard to keep them straight." In reality, I was the lead structural consultant for the Zakim Bridge. I knew the load-bearing capacity of every cable. I knew the sigh of the concrete. But I let the lie hang there. "Of course," Dr. Aris said, making a quick mark in his notebook. "Memory is a funny thing, isn't it? Do you know what day it is today, Mr. Bennett?" I looked at him. This was insulting. It was Tuesday, November 14th, Sarah's birthday. "It is Wednesday, isn't it?" I said. "Or Thursday. The days run together when you don't work." Sarah walked in with a tray of appetizers. She heard my answer and let out a dramatic sigh. "Dad, it is Tuesday. We told you that on the phone this morning." Remember, I blinked rapidly, feigning distress. "Right. Tuesday. Of course. Sorry, Sarah." "It is okay, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Here, have some water. We didn't want to give you wine with your balance issues." She handed me a plastic tumbler. Not a crystal glass like everyone else. A plastic cup like you would give a toddler. The humiliation burned in my chest hotter than fire. I had designed foundations that held up skyscrapers, and my daughter was giving me a sippy cup because she claimed I could not hold a glass. I took the cup. "Thank you, dear," I said. Michael sat in the armchair across from us. "So, Dad, how is the house holding up? Any more issues with the stove?" I looked at him. There had never been issues with the stove. "The stove," I repeated blankly. "Yeah," Michael said, leaning forward. "Sarah said you left the gas on again last week. The neighbors smelled it." "It is getting dangerous, Joseph." He was inventing history. "Rewrite the past to control the future." "I don't think I did that," I said softly. "You did, Dad," Sarah chimed in. "You just don't remember. That is what scares us. You don't remember the dangerous things you do." Dr. Aris was writing furiously now. I could see the satisfaction on their faces. They thought it was working. They thought the old man was cracking. "So Joseph," Dr. Aris said, looking up, "do you manage your own bills? It must be complicated keeping track of everything." "It is overwhelming sometimes," I admitted, letting my shoulders slump. So much paperwork. "Maybe it is time you let someone help you with that," Michael suggested. His voice was like a coiled snake. Just to take the burden off. We can talk about that later, Sarah said quickly, cutting him off. Let's have dinner. We moved to the dining room. The table was set with their finest china. I was placed at the end, separate from the conversation. They talked over me about their vacations, about Michael's business ventures, about Mia's college applications. I ate my soup in silence, letting the spoon clatter against the bowl occasionally. Then my granddaughter Mia spoke up. She was 17, glued to her phone, but she looked up at me with a strange expression. Pity, maybe. Or guilt. Grandpa, she said. Are you excited about moving to green fields? The room went dead silent. The fork froze halfway to my mouth. Green Fields. I knew that place. It was a state-run nursing home on the other side of the city. It had been cited for health violations 3 times in the last 5 years. It was a warehouse for the indigent and the forgotten. It was a place people went to die. Sarah hissed. Not now. What is Greenfields? I asked, looking around the table with wide, confused eyes. It is a resort, Dad, Michael lied smoothly. A retirement community. We were just looking at brochures. Very high-end. Just thinking about options for the future. No. Mia said, her voice rising. You said he was going there tonight. You said Dr. Aris was going to sign the paper, and that is enough, Mia. Michael shouted, slamming his hand on the table. Go to your room, now. Mia stood up, threw her napkin on her plate, and stormed off. The silence she left behind was thick and heavy. I looked at Sarah. She refused to meet my eyes. She was pouring more wine into her glass, her hand shaking slightly. Is that true, Sarah? I asked, my voice trembling for real this time. Are you sending me away, Dad? Don't get upset, Sarah said. Her voice was tight. Mia is confused. We just want you to be safe. You are not safe in that old house alone. You need care. I need my home, I said. Your home is falling apart. Michael snapped, dropping the facade of kindness. You are hoarding trash. You are a fire hazard. It is irresponsible of us to let you stay there. I looked at Dr. Aris. He was watching me closely, waiting for an outburst, waiting for the dementia to show its violent side. I swallowed my rage. I forced it down into the pit of my stomach. I just want to finish my dinner, I said softly, looking down at my plate. Good, Michael said. Eat up. We have some papers to look at after dessert. I knew what those papers were. They wouldn't wait for the court. They wanted me to sign a power of attorney voluntarily tonight. They would use the doctor's presence to certify I was lucid enough to sign, but sick enough to need it. It was a catch-22 trap. Excuse me, I said, standing up slowly. I need to use the restroom. Michael stood up too. Do you need help finding it, Dad? I know where it is, Michael, I said. I shuffled out of the dining room. As soon as I turned the corner into the hallway, my posture straightened. I moved silently, not toward the bathroom, but toward Michael's home office down the hall. The door was ajar. I slipped inside and closed the door softly. I could hear their voices in the dining room arguing about Mia's outburst. I had about 3 minutes. I walked to Michael's desk. His laptop was open. The screen was dark, but I tapped the spacebar. It prompted for a password. I looked around. Michael was arrogant, but he was not creative. There was a sticky note under the lamp base. Range Rover 88. I typed it in. The screen flared to life. It was open to his email. The inbox was a wall of red flags. Urgent final notice. Delinquency alert. Foreclosure warning. I clicked on the most recent email from a sender named Vantage Capital. The subject line was immediate payment required. Mr. Miller, the email read, Your outstanding balance of $1.2 million is now 30 days past due. The collateral you pledged the property at 42 Oak Street is now subject to seizure. If payment is not received by Friday, we will proceed with liquidation. I froze. 42 Oak Street. That was my house. My modest little house that I had owned free and clear for 30 years. How had he pledged my house as collateral? I minimized the window and searched his files. I found a folder labeled Deeds. Inside was a scanned copy of a quitclaim deed dated 6 months ago, transferring ownership of my house to Michael Miller. At the bottom was my signature, but I had never signed it. It was a forgery. A clumsy one, but good enough for a predatory lender. I felt a wave of nausea. They weren't just going to put me in a home. They had already stolen mine. They needed to lock me away so I wouldn't discover the foreclosure notice when it was pinned to my door. I pulled out my phone and took photos of the screen. The emails, the forged deed, the bank statements showing Michael's crypto trading account with a balance of $0 down from $800,000. He had gambled it all away. Suddenly the doorknob turned. I barely had time to lock the phone screen and step away from the desk before the door opened. It was Sarah. She stopped when she saw me. Her eyes darted to the computer, then to me. "Dad, what are you doing in here?" "The bathroom is the other way." I looked at her. My little girl. The girl I taught to ride a bike. The girl I walked down the aisle. She was looking at me with suspicion and fear. I got turned around. "Sarah," I said, letting the confused tremor return to my voice. "I was looking for the coat closet. I wanted to go home." She let out a breath she had been holding. She believed me. She believed I was just a senile old man lost in a hallway. "The coat closet is by the front door. Dad, come on." "Let's go back to the table. Michael has the papers ready." I followed her back to the dining room. I had the evidence. I had the recording. Now I just needed to survive the next hour without signing my life away. We sat back down. Michael cleared the table and placed a thick stack of documents in front of me. He uncapped a pen. "Okay, Dad," Michael said. "This is just standard stuff. Updated medical insurance forms, and a permission slip so Sarah can pick up your prescriptions for you. Just sign here, here, and here." He pointed to the signature lines. He was covering the text of the document with his other hand. I leaned in, squinting. My glasses were in my pocket, but I pretended I couldn't find them. "I can't see the letters very well, son," I said. "It is all blurry." "Just sign where my finger is, Dad. Trust me," Michael said, pressing the pen into my hand. I held the pen. The tip hovered over the paper. It was a durable power of attorney. I could see the header peeking out from under his palm. I don't know," I stammered. My hand shook violently. The pen skittered across the paper, leaving a jagged ink trail that looked nothing like a signature. It tore through the page. "Oops," I said, dropping the pen. "Look what I did. I am so clumsy." Michael snatched the paper away, cursing under his breath. "Damn it, Joseph. Look at this mess." "It is okay," Dr. Aris said smoothly. "We can print another copy. But perhaps Mr. Bennett is too fatigued tonight. His motor skills are clearly compromised. This is good evidence for the affidavit, Michael." Sarah looked at me with pure venom. "You are useless, Dad. Can't you do one simple thing?" I shrank back in my chair. "I am sorry, Sarah. I just want to go to bed." "Fine," she snapped. "We will go to the lawyer's office tomorrow morning. We will have him guide your hand if we have to. Go home." Michael practically dragged me to the door. He shoved my coat at me. "Drive carefully, Joseph," he said, his voice cold. "Do not hit anyone. We will pick you up at 8 a.m. sharp. Be ready." I walked out into the cold night air. As soon as I was in the cab of my truck, the act dropped. My hands stopped shaking. My spine straightened. I looked back at the house, that glowing beacon of lies. "See you at 8. "Michael," I whispered. I drove to a gas station 2 miles away and pulled into the dark corner of the lot. I pulled out my phone and dialed Richard. It was 11 p.m. Joseph Richard answered on the first ring. "Are you okay?" "I am better than okay, Richard," I said, my voice hard as steel. "I have them. Did you sign anything?" "No." "But listen to me, Richard. I need you to run a title search on my house immediately and check the public records for a Michael Miller. He has forged a deed. He put my house up as collateral for a hard money loan." What Richard's voice exploded. "That is a felony, Joseph. That is grand larceny and mortgage fraud." "I know, and I have photos of the emails proving he is in default. But Richard, there is something else. What do you remember the Catherine Trust?" There was a pause on the line. "Of course. The patent royalties. The structural couplings you invented in '92. Joseph, that trust has been accumulating interest for 20 years. You haven't touched a dime of it." "I know," I said. "It was supposed to be for Sarah, for her future. But Sarah doesn't know it exists, does she?" "No. You insisted on keeping it anonymous. You wanted them to be self-sufficient." "Exactly. How much is in there, Richard?" "Last time I checked, with the market rally, it is north of $12 million. I looked at the dashboard of my old truck. $12 million. And my daughter was trying to put me in a state home to steal a house worth $400,000. The irony was so sharp it could cut glass." "Richard," I said, "freeze the trust. Remove Sarah as the beneficiary. Today. Consider it done. But Joseph, about tomorrow. They are coming for you." "Let them come," I said. "But I need you to find out who actually owns Sarah's house. Her house, why? Because Michael is broke, Richard. He is drowning. There is no way he owns that $2 million mansion. He is a fraud. Find out who holds the deed. I will have my paralegal on it tonight." "Joseph, what are you going to do?" "I'm going to go home," I said. "I am going to sleep in my own bed. And tomorrow when they come to take me, I am going to introduce them to the real Joseph Bennett." I hung up and started the engine. The drive home was quiet. I felt a strange sense of calm. For years I had worried about them. I had worried I wasn't giving enough. I had worried I was a burden. That weight was gone now. They had freed me. By showing me they were monsters, they had freed me from the obligation of being a father. Now I was just a judge, and the sentencing was about to begin. The transition from the living room to the dining hall felt less like a movement between spaces and more like a prisoner transfer. Michael placed a hand on my shoulder, guiding me with a pressure that was just firm enough to be patronizing. He steered me toward the far end of the long mahogany table, the spot furthest from the head, where he seated himself, with the air of a king holding court. Sarah sat to his right, Dr. Eris to his left, and Mia slumped into the chair opposite the doctor, her thumbs already flying across the screen of her smartphone. The room was dimly lit by a crystal chandelier that I knew they had purchased on credit 3 years ago. A gaudy thing that cast fractured shadows across the table setting. I looked down at my place setting and felt a fresh wave of humiliation wash over me, hot and prickling. Everyone else had heavy polished silverware, the kind that had substantial weight in your hand. My setting was different. Next to my fine china plate sat a bright yellow plastic spoon and a matching fork, the kind you would buy in a bulk bag for a toddler's birthday party. There was no knife. Sarah saw me staring at the plastic utensils. Her smile was tight, a mask of pained necessity. "We just didn't want you to hurt yourself, Dad," she said, her voice pitching up an octave as if speaking to a frightened animal. "You know how your hands shake. Last time you dropped a fork and it scratched the floor." I had never dropped a fork in this house. My hands, which had drafted blueprints for suspension bridges with millimeter precision for 40 years, were currently resting on my lap, steady as stone. But I didn't argue. I couldn't argue. To fight back now would only prove their narrative of my aggression. I simply nodded, looking down at my lap, playing the part of the defeated old man they so desperately wanted me to be. Michael uncorked a bottle of expensive Cabernet. The rich aroma of oak and dark berries drifted down the table. He poured a generous glass for Dr. Aris, then for Sarah, and finally filled his own glass to the brim. He skipped me entirely. "Water for you, Joseph," Michael announced, placing a plastic sippy cup with a lid in front of me. "Alcohol interferes with your medication. We can't have you having another episode." I wasn't on any medication that interacted with alcohol. I took a single baby aspirin a day for heart health. That was it. But Dr. Aris was watching his pen hovering over that damn notebook. If I demanded wine, I would be labeled an alcoholic or non-compliant. So I reached for the plastic cup with a trembling hand, allowing it to rattle against the table before bringing it to my lips. The water was lukewarm. So Dr. Aris said, slicing into his steak with surgical precision, "Michael tells me you've been having trouble with spatial awareness, getting lost in your own neighborhood." I looked up, letting my mouth hang open slightly before answering. "It all looks the same sometimes," I mumbled. "The streets, they changed the signs." "They haven't changed the signs in 20 years, Joseph." Michael corrected me, speaking with his mouth full. "You just can't process the information anymore. It's dangerous. That's why we took your keys." I stiffened. My keys were in my pocket. I had driven here, but this was news to me. They were building a record of facts that didn't exist. Sarah chimed in, cutting her meat into tiny pieces before looking at me. "We're just worried, Dad. We found the car parked on the lawn last week. You thought it was the driveway." I slowly picked up a spoonful of mashed potatoes with my yellow plastic shovel. The food tasted like ash. I realized then that this dinner wasn't just an evaluation. It was a trial, and the verdict had been written before I even walked through the door. They weren't just observing me. They were erasing me. They were rewriting my history in real time, turning a capable man into an invalid, layer by layer, lie by lie. The conversation shifted away from me, as if I were a piece of furniture that had ceased to be interesting. Michael began boasting about his investments, talking loudly about a new venture in commercial real estate. I listened closely. He was throwing around buzzwords, leverage, equity, liquidity, but he was using them incorrectly. He sounded like a man who had watched too many financial news channels but had never actually balanced a ledger. He mentioned unlocking the value of assets. I knew exactly which asset he was talking about. My house. My paid-off mortgage-free house that sat on a double lot in a neighborhood that was rapidly gentrifying. Then came the moment that stopped time. Mia, who had been silent until now, suddenly looked up from her phone. She looked at me, then at her parents, her expression a mix of teenage boredom and genuine confusion. "So when do we have to clear out his room?" she asked. Sarah froze her fork halfway to her mouth. Michael choked slightly on his wine. "What do you mean, honey?" Sarah asked, her voice dangerously sweet. "For Greenfields," Mia said, shrugging. "You guys said that after tonight, Grandpa is going to Greenfields and I can turn his guest room into my streaming studio. So do I have to wait until the weekend? Or is he not coming back tonight?" The silence that descended on the table was absolute. The air was sucked out of the room. Greenfields. The name echoed in my mind like a slamming cell door. I knew Greenfields. It wasn't the luxury retirement community Michael had lied about earlier. It was a state-subsidized long-term care facility in the industrial district. I knew it intimately because 30 years ago, my engineering firm had been contracted to inspect the foundation of their south wing. I remembered the smell of bleach masking the scent of urine. I remembered the water stains on the ceiling and the hollow vacant eyes of the residents lined up in wheelchairs in the hallway, staring at a television that wasn't turned on. It was a warehouse for the dying. It was a place you sent people when you wanted to forget they existed. Joseph looked confused, Dr. Aris noted, breaking the silence. He scribbled something down. Lack of orientation to future planning. Mia, that's enough, Michael snapped, his face flushing red. We're not discussing logistics right now. But you said Mia started. I said enough, Michael roared. I looked down at my plastic cup. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a cold, hard rhythm. This was the final piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just greed. Greed I could almost understand. Everyone wants money. This was malice. This was disposal. They didn't just want my assets. They wanted to erase the inconvenience of my existence. They wanted to throw me into a pit called Green Fields and let me rot so they could turn my life's work into a streaming studio and a bailout for their bad debts. I looked at Sarah, my daughter, the woman I had carried on my shoulders at parades, the woman whose tears I had dried when her first boyfriend broke her heart. She was refusing to look at me. She was intently studying the pattern on the tablecloth, her jaw set in a line of stubborn refusal. She knew what Greenfields was. She knew, and she had agreed to it. She had signed off on my slow death. A strange sensation washed over me then. The grief, the heartbreak, the stinging betrayal, it all evaporated. It was replaced by a clarity as sharp and cold as a winter morning. The father in me died in that dining room, between the plastic spoon and the lie about the nursing home. The man who sat in the chair was no longer Sarah's father. I was an engineer again. I was looking at a structural failure. And when a structure is compromised, when the rot has eaten through the support beams, you don't patch it. You condemn it. You demolish it. I looked up, letting my eyes drift vacantly around the room, careful to keep the mask in place. I let a little bit of drool gather at the corner of my mouth before wiping it away with a shaking hand. Greenfields, I asked, my voice thin and reedy. Is that the place with the nice gardens? Where Mom is? Sarah finally looked at me. Relief washed over her face. She thought I was confusing the nursing home with the cemetery where Catherine was buried. She thought I was too far gone to understand the horror of what her daughter had just revealed. Yes, Dad, Sarah lied, reaching out to pat my hand. It's a beautiful place, just like where Mom is. You'll be happy there. Excellent, Dr. Aris muttered. Patient exhibits confusion regarding the deceased spouse. Delusional transference. This supports the diagnosis. I gripped the plastic spoon until it bent in my hand. They thought they had won. They thought they were looking at a husk. They had no idea that behind the foggy eyes and the trembling hands I was already calculating the demolition charges. I was mentally reviewing every asset, every legal loophole, every document in my possession. I am tired, I announced, pushing the plate away. I want to go home. We have dessert, Joseph, Michael said, his confidence returning now that the crisis had passed. And then just a few papers to sign. Just routine updates for your insurance. I'm tired, I repeated, making my voice sound petulant like a cranky child. I want to sleep. Sarah stood up. Let him rest, Michael. We can do the papers in the morning. We have the appointment with the lawyer anyway. Let's just get him home before he has an accident here. An accident. As if I were a dog that hadn't been housebroken. I stood up, leaning heavily on the table, faking a stagger. Michael rushed to grab my arm, not to help, but to control. Easy there, old-timer, he said. Let's get you to the car. As we walked to the door, I passed a mirror in the hallway. I caught a glimpse of myself, hunched, disheveled, looking every bit the victim. But inside the pocket of my jacket, the red light of the recorder was still blinking, capturing every insult, every lie, every conspiracy. I wasn't leaving a victim. I was leaving as a spy who had just secured the enemy's battle plans. I let Michael guide me to the truck. He opened the door and practically shoved me inside. Go straight home, Joseph, he commanded. Do not stop. Do not pass. Go. We will be there at 8 a.m. to pick you up. Pack a bag. Why do I need a bag? I asked innocently. Just for the trip, Sarah said from the doorway. Just pack a bag, Dad. I started the engine. The old Ford rumbled to life, a sound I trusted more than anyone in that house. I watched them in the rearview mirror as I pulled away. They were standing together, a united front of deceit. Michael put his arm around Sarah. They looked relieved. They were probably already spending the money in their heads. I drove down the long, winding driveway past the manicured hedges and the stone lions that guarded their gates. As soon as I turned onto the main road and was out of their sight, I sat up straight. The tremors in my hands vanished. The fog in my eyes cleared. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the recorder, pressing the stop button. The file saved. Green fields, I said aloud to the empty cab of the truck. My voice was deep and steady. Over my dead body. I reached for my phone and dialed Richard again. It was time to execute the counter-maneuver. The dinner from hell was over. The war had just begun. I stood up from the dining table, my knees popping audibly in the tense silence. I made a show of steadying myself against the chair back, letting my hand tremble just enough to rattle the wood. I muttered something about my bladder, a standard complaint for men my age, and shuffled toward the hallway. Michael watched me with the hawk-like gaze of a predator tracking wounded prey, but he didn't get up. He just gestured vaguely toward the corridor, with his wineglass arrogant, in his certainty that I was a confused old man who could barely navigate a straight line. As soon as I crossed the threshold into the hallway and was out of their line of sight, the shuffle vanished. My spine straightened, and my breathing shifted from shallow gasps to deep, silent rhythms. I wasn't heading for the bathroom. I was heading for the lion's den. The hallway was lined with photos of their perfect life vacations in Aspen Gallis Mia's recitals. It was a gallery of lies funded by debt and deception. I moved past them, my footsteps soundless on the plush runner rug. I had been a structural engineer for 40 years. I knew how to move through a building without disturbing its equilibrium. I reached the heavy oak door of Michael's home office. It was slightly ajar, leaking a sliver of blue light from the monitors inside. I pushed it open just enough to slip through and clicked it shut behind me, engaging the lock with a soft snick. The room smelled of stale cigar smoke and expensive leather, the scent of a man trying too hard to project power. I didn't waste a second. I went straight to the desk, a massive slab of imported mahogany that looked like it belonged to a CEO, not a failed entrepreneur. The computer monitors were asleep, glowing with a faint amber standby light. I tapped the mouse. The screens flared to life, bright and blinding in the dim room. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of adrenaline. If they walked in now, the game was over. I would be dragged out by police labeled senile and paranoid, exactly as they planned. A password prompt blocked my path. I stared at the blinking cursor. Michael was not a complex man. He was a creature of vanity. I tried the obvious, first the license plate of his beloved car. Access denied. I tried his birthday. Access denied. I took a breath, closing my eyes and thinking like him. What did Michael love most in the world? Money. I typed in the ticker symbol for Bitcoin, followed by the year he claimed he made his first million. Access granted. The desktop icons flooded the screen. I didn't have time to sift through folders. I went straight to the email client, which was already open. The inbox was a disaster zone of bold, unread subjects. Urgent. Final notice. Liquidation warning. It was a wall of red flags. I clicked on the most recent thread from a sender labeled simply Omega Capital. The text was brutal, stripped of any corporate politeness. Mr. Miller, your grace period expired at 5:00 p.m. today. The collateral pledged residential property at 42 Oak Street is now active for seizure. We are initiating the transfer of title. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises or face eviction. 42 Oak Street. My house. The house I built with my own hands. The house where Catherine died. He hadn't just put a lien on it. He had sold it out from under me to a hard money lender to cover his gambling losses. The dates on the emails went back 6 months. He had forged the deed transfer half a year ago. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat, hot and acidic. I wasn't just a guest at dinner. I was a trespassing tenant in a property they had already lost. But the financial ruin wasn't enough. I needed to know the intent. I needed to know the heart of the betrayal. I minimized the email and opened the messaging app that was blinking in the taskbar. It was a chat log between Michael and Sarah. I scrolled back to the morning. My eyes scanned the text, and with every line a piece of my soul turned to ice. Sarah. Did the doctor confirm for tonight, Michael? Yes. Aris is on board. He says he can write it up as rapid onset dementia. We just need the old man to look confused. Sarah. He always looks confused. God, I hate watching him eat. It's disgusting. He's like a child. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles turning white. My own daughter. The girl I had carried on my shoulders. The girl I had secretly paid tuition for so she wouldn't start life with debt. I scrolled further back to last week. Michael. The lender is squeezing me. We need the cash from the house sale by the end of the month. Sarah. I know, but he's stubborn. He won't leave that dump. Michael. Then we force him. Once we get the conservatorship, we dump him at Greenfields. The state pays for it, we keep the assets. It's clean. Sarah. Greenfields is a hellhole, Mike. It smells like urine. Michael. So what, he won't know the difference? He's past his expiration date anyway. He's just a cash cow that's stopped giving milk. It's time to take him to the slaughterhouse. A cash cow. Past his expiration date. I stared at the words, willing them to change, willing them to be a joke, a misunderstanding. But they sat there on the screen glowing with malicious truth. They didn't see a father. They didn't see a human being. They saw an asset to be liquidated, a nuisance to be discarded. The pain that had been throbbing in my chest since I received Richard's text suddenly vanished. It was replaced by a cold, Arctic clarity. The grief was gone. The hesitation was gone. The father who loved his little girl unconditionally died in that chair reading those words. In his place sat the engineer. I was looking at a structural failure. The foundation was rotten. There was no salvaging it. The only option was controlled demolition. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were rock steady now. I took photos of everything. The emails from the loan sharks, the forged deed documents attached to the messages, and the chat logs. I made sure to capture the timestamps, the names, the cruelty. Every pixel was a nail in their coffin. I found one more document in a folder marked medical. It was a draft of a letter supposedly written by me, stating that I was voluntarily surrendering my rights due to failing mental health. It was already signed. My signature was a perfect forgery executed with a level of practice that sickened me. I snapped a picture of that too. Suddenly I heard footsteps in the hallway. The heavy, muffled thud of footsteps on carpet getting louder. Then Sarah's voice close to the door. He's been in there a while. I should check on him. Woman. Leave him, Michael's voice answered slightly further away. He's probably just lost in the bathroom mirror. No, I don't want him wandering around, Sarah said. The footsteps stopped right outside the office door. I froze. I was trapped. If she opened the door and saw me at the computer, the charade would be over. They would know I knew. And desperate people do dangerous things. I looked around the room frantically. There was no other exit. The window was locked and we were on the second floor. The doorknob began to turn. I threw myself away from the desk, diving toward the bookshelf in the corner. I grabbed a random book, something about golf, and let my body slump against the wall, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor, looking dazed. The door swung open. Sarah stood there, silhouetted by the hallway light. She looked at the empty desk, then scanned the room, until her eyes landed on me, huddled in the corner, with a book held upside down. "Dad?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "What are you doing in here?" I looked up at her, blinking rapidly, summoning every ounce of acting ability I possessed. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I held up the book. I was looking for the photo album," I stammered, my voice trembling. "Your mother, she said the album was in the library. I wanted to see her." Sarah's face softened, not with kindness, but with relief. She saw exactly what she wanted to see, a confused, grieving old man, lost in the wrong room, looking for a ghost. She didn't look at the computer screen, which had mercifully gone dark just seconds before she entered. "This is Michael's office, Dad," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "Mom's photos aren't here. Come on. Everyone is waiting for you." She extended a hand. I stared at it. It was the hand that had typed, "He's just a cash cow." I wanted to slap it away. Instead, I reached out and let her pull me up. "I'm sorry," I whispered. And for the first time that night, I wasn't acting. I was sorry. I was sorry for her, because she had no idea what she had just unleashed. "Let's go," she said, pulling me toward the door. "We need to finish dinner." As I followed her back into the hallway, I felt the weight of the phone in my pocket. It felt heavier now, dense with the gravity of the evidence it held. I had what I needed. The break-in was successful. Now I just had to survive the rest of the night without vomiting from the sheer proximity of their evil. The next time I entered this office, it wouldn't be as a thief. It would be as the owner. I allowed Sarah to guide me back to the dining room, her grip on my elbow firm and controlling, like a nurse escorting a wayward patient back to his room. My heart was still hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a physical echo of the adrenaline that had surged through me in Michael's office. I had seen the proof. I had seen the abyss that they had dug for me. Now I had to sit at the edge of it and dangle my feet without falling in. We re-entered the dining room. The conversation stopped abruptly. Michael looked up from his wine glass, his eyes narrowing as he scanned my face. Dr. Aris paused with his fork halfway to his mouth, his clinical gaze dissecting my posture, my gait, the way I held my head. They were looking for guilt. They were looking for a sign that I had discovered their treachery. "Everything okay?" Michael asked, his voice slick with false concern, but edged with suspicion. "You were gone a long time, Joseph. We were about to send a search party." I felt a bead of cold sweat trickle down my spine. This was the moment. If I faltered, if I showed even a flicker of the rage that was currently boiling my blood, the trap would snap shut on my neck. I needed a cover. I needed to be the man they thought I was. I couldn't find the light switch," I stammered, letting my voice crack. I hunched my shoulders, making myself look smaller, frailer. It was dark in the hall. I got confused. I thought I was back in my old house on Sycamore Street. It was a risky lie. We hadn't lived on Sycamore Street for 30 years. But it was the kind of detail a dementia patient would slip up on. Sarah let out a sharp, exasperated breath beside me. "Dad, we moved from Sycamore Street before I even started high school. You are in Wellesley. You are at my house." "Right," I mumbled, looking down at my shoes. "Wellesley. Right." I saw Dr. Aris nod slightly and scribble something in his notebook. Disorientation in time and place, regression to past memories. I had just given them the ammunition they wanted, and they didn't even realize the gun was pointed backward. "Sit down, Dad," Sarah said, pulling my chair out. "Just sit down before you fall down." I sank into the chair. The wood felt hard and unforgiving. I looked at the table. My plastic cup was still there, sitting in a small puddle of condensation. The yellow spoon mocked me. I looked at Michael. He was relaxed now, the suspicion gone from his eyes, replaced by a smug satisfaction. He thought he had won. He thought the old engineer was just a heap of crumbling bricks. I realized then that I had a choice. I could stand up, flip the table, scream about the forged deed and the emails, and call the police right now. But what would that achieve? They would deny it. They would claim I was hallucinating. They would say I hacked his computer or that I was making it up. It would be my word against theirs, and right now they had a doctor documenting my insanity. No, an engineer doesn't swing a sledgehammer until he knows exactly where the load-bearing walls are. I needed them to feel safe. I needed them to feel so victorious, so untouchable, that they would get careless. I needed them to execute the plan so I could catch them with their hands in the jar. I decided then and there to give the performance of my life. You want a senile old man, I thought, staring at the plastic cup. I will give you a senile old man. I reached for the water. I let my hand tremble, a violent, spasmodic shake that I had seen in my own father years ago. I successfully grabbed the cup, but as I lifted it, I jerked my wrist. The water sloshed out, splashing over the rim, soaking the expensive linen tablecloth and dripping onto my trousers. "Whoops," I said, my voice vacant. "Oh my God," Sarah cried out, jumping up and grabbing a napkin. "Dad, look what you did. This is Italian linen. I'm sorry," I whispered, letting my hand hover in the air, still shaking. It slipped. Michael rolled his eyes, making no effort to hide his disgust. "Jesus, Joseph. It is like dining with a toddler. Can't you even hold a cup?" "Note the lack of motor control," Dr. Aris murmured to Michael, not even lowering his voice. "Tremors are consistent with advanced neurological decline." I stared at the wet stain spreading on the white cloth. It looked like a map of their greed. I let my jaw go slack. I started to hum a tune, a discordant, broken melody, ignoring Sarah as she aggressively dabbed at the table around me. "Are you listening to us, Dad?" Sarah snapped. I looked at her blankly. "Is it time for the cake?" I asked. "I like chocolate." Sarah stopped scrubbing. She looked at Michael. Her eyes were hard, devoid of any daughterly affection. She looked at me with the cold calculation of a butcher eyeing a side of beef. "Yes, Dad," she said, her voice flat. "It is time for cake. And then it is time for you to go." They brought out the cake. It was a store-bought thing, small and afterthought-ish. They sang Happy Birthday, quickly rushing through the verses. I clapped offbeat, smiling, a vacant, goofy smile. Inside my mind was racing, cataloging every asset, every account numbers, every legal maneuver I would need to execute in the next 24 hours. Michael cut a slice and placed it in front of me. "Eat up," he said. I picked up the yellow plastic spoon. I took a bite. It was dry and tasteless. As I chewed, I watched them. I watched Michael check his watch, calculating how soon he could get back to his gambling debts. I watched Sarah text someone under the table, probably her lawyer. I watched Mia ignore us all. They were so confident. They looked at me and saw an ATM machine with a broken screen. They didn't see the man who had calculated wind loads for skyscrapers. They didn't see the man who had protected them from the harsh realities of the world for decades. They saw a victim. I finished the cake, leaving crumbs on my face intentionally. Sarah handed me a napkin without looking at me. "Okay," Michael announced, standing up. "Show is over. Joseph, get your coat. We're doing the paperwork tomorrow morning at 9. I'll pick you up." I stood up, leaning heavily on the table. "Tomorrow," I repeated. "Yes," Michael said, steering me toward the door. "Tomorrow we get everything sorted out. You won't have to worry about a thing ever again." I put on my coat. I wrapped my scarf around my neck. I turned to look at them one last time. They stood in the foyer, a tableau of suburban rot. "Good night," I said. My voice was raspy. "Thank you for the party." "Just go, Dad," Sarah said, opening the door. I walked out into the night. The cold air hit my face, bracing and clean. I shuffled down the walkway until I reached my truck. I opened the door and climbed in. As soon as the door clicked shut, the transformation happened. The slump in my shoulders disappeared. The vacancy in my eyes was replaced by a sharp, flinty glare. I wiped the cake crumbs from my mouth with the back of my hand. I looked at the house glowing warm and golden in the night, a beautiful shell hiding a rotten core. They wanted me weak. They wanted me confused. They wanted me to be a prop in their play for wealth. They had spent the entire evening writing a narrative of my demise. I started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness. "You want a madman," I whispered to the windshield. "You want a man who has lost his mind. Fine. I will show you what happens when a man loses his mind and finds his resolve." I shifted the truck into gear. I wasn't just driving home. I was driving toward war. I had the evidence. I had the motivation. And tomorrow, when they came to collect their prize, they were going to find that the bank was closed, the vault was empty, and the security system was armed. I pulled out of the driveway, leaving the lies behind me. The act was over. The engineer was back on the job, and I was about to bring the whole structure crashing down on their heads. I sat back down at the dining table, and the atmosphere had shifted from tense to predatory. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with a silent, frantic urgency that radiated from Michael. He was vibrating with it, a low-frequency hum of desperation that I could almost feel against my skin. He poured himself another glass of wine, his fourth, and the dark liquid sloshed dangerously close to the rim. He needed me to be incompetent tonight. He needed it like a drowning man needs a lifeline. And I was going to throw him an anchor instead. Sarah placed a bowl of soup in front of me. It was a thick orange butternut squash bisque. It was steaming hot. I looked at it, then at the yellow plastic spoon. This was my prop. This was my weapon. I let my head loll slightly to the side, relaxing the muscles in my neck until I felt my chin touch my chest. I blinked slowly, heavily, as if keeping my eyelids open was a Herculean task. "Eat up, Dad," Sarah said, her voice tight and impatient. "It is getting cold." I reached for the spoon. I didn't just let my hand shake. I choreographed a symphony of tremors. My fingers spasmed as they closed around the plastic handle. I lifted the spoon, dipping it into the thick soup. I brought it halfway to my mouth, and then with a calculated jerk of my wrist, I let the contents tip. The hot orange liquid splashed onto my chin, ran down my neck, and soaked into the collar of my shirt. A significant amount landed on the table, creating a bright, ugly puddle on the expensive runner. I let out a small, pathetic whimper of distress, dropping the spoon into the bowl with a wet clatter. "Oh no," I mumbled, dabbing ineffectually at my shirt, with my hand smearing the soup further. I made a mess. I always make a mess. The reaction was immediate and telling. In a normal family, a daughter would jump up to help. She would grab a napkin, wipe her father's face, tell him it was okay. Sarah did none of that. She recoiled, pulling her chair back with a screech of wood against wood, looking at me with pure, unadulterated revulsion. "Jesus, Dad," she snapped. "Can't you just focus for 5 minutes? Look at you. You're disgusting." "Let him be, Sarah," Michael said, but his voice wasn't kind. It was triumphant. He looked at Dr. Aris. "Did you see that loss of motor control? Inability to perform basic feeding tasks. That goes in the report, right?" Dr. Aris was scribbling furiously in his notebook, his head nodding in a rhythm that matched his pen strokes. "Yes, significant impairment," Aris muttered, not even looking at me. "Advanced degeneration of fine motor skills. It confirms the timeline you gave me, Michael. This isn't just age. This is pathology." I sat there, feeling the soup cool and harden on my skin, feeling the sticky humiliation of it. But beneath the shame, the engineer in me was smiling. I had just given them the structural flaw they were looking for. They were so focused on the mess, they didn't see the man behind it, watching them with cold, clear eyes. I decided to push it further. I needed to seal the deal. I needed them to believe I was so far gone that I didn't even know who they were. I looked up at Michael. I squinted, tilting my head as if trying to place a stranger's face. "Rusty," I asked, my voice rising in a confused query. "Is that you, boy? You haven't been fed yet." The table went silent. Rusty was the name of the golden retriever we had owned 20 years ago. The dog had been dead for 15 years. Michael stared at me, his mouth slightly open. For a second, I saw a flicker of genuine hurt in his eyes, the realization that his father-in-law didn't recognize him. But it was quickly swallowed by greed. This was better than a spilled soup. This was the jackpot. "He is confusing me with the dog," Michael whispered to Sarah, a slow, ugly smile spreading across his face. "He thinks I'm the dog." Sarah looked at me, shaking her head. "Dad, that's Michael, your son-in-law. Rusty is dead. Rusty died when I was in college." "Dead," I repeated, letting my face crumble into tragedy. "Rusty is dead." "Yes, Dad," Sarah shouted, losing her temper completely. "Everyone is dead or dying, God. This is impossible." Subject exhibits severe facial agnosia and temporal disorientation, Dr. Aris narrated to himself as he wrote. Confusion of human subjects with deceased pets. Stage 3 bordering on stage 4. Michael stood up. He had seen enough. He had his diagnosis. Now he wanted his payout. He moved with a manic energy, clearing the soup bowl away and slapping a leather portfolio onto the table in front of me. The sound was loud, aggressive. "Okay, that's enough dinner," Michael announced. "We need to handle business before he forgets how to hold a pen completely. Joseph, listen to me." He leaned in close. I could smell the stale wine and the desperation on his breath. "We are going to fix everything, Joseph. We are going to make sure you are taken care of. But Sarah and I need to be able to talk to the doctors for you. We need to be able to pay your bills so the lights don't get turned off. Do you understand?" I looked at him with wide, watery eyes. "The lights," I whispered fearfully. "I don't want to be in the dark." "Exactly." Michael said, his voice dropping to a soothing, manipulative purr. "We don't want you in the dark. So I need you to sign this paper. It just says that Sarah and I can help you. That's all. It's a helper paper." He opened the portfolio. Inside was a thick document. Durable power of attorney. It was clipped open to the signature page. He had folded the previous pages back so I couldn't read the clauses. The clauses that undoubtedly gave him the right to sell my real estate, liquidate my stocks, and make medical decisions on my behalf, including institutionalization. He uncapped a heavy, expensive fountain pen and pressed it into my soup-stained hand. "Sign right here, Joseph," he commanded, pointing to the line, right next to the X. I held the pen. It felt heavy and cold. This was the moment. If I signed my name even illegibly, they could find a notary crooked enough to stamp it. If I refused, they might get physical. They might try to force my hand. I had to thread the needle. I had to try to sign, and I had to fail spectacularly. I leaned over the paper. I brought the pen tip down. I let my hand hover, shaking violently. I can't see the line," I whined. "It's moving." "It's right there," Michael hissed, grabbing my wrist. His fingers dug into my skin. He was hurting me and he didn't care. "Just hold the pen still and write Joseph Bennett. Do it." I let out a cry of pain and confusion. I jerked my arm back, fighting his grip. In the struggle, I drove the nib of the fountain pen into the paper. I pushed down with all my strength, not writing, but stabbing. The sharp metal tip pierced the document. I dragged it sideways, ripping through the signature line, tearing the heavy bond paper all the way to the margin. A jagged, dark tear ruined the document. Ink bled out from the broken nib, creating a Rorschach test of disaster on the page. I dropped the pen as if it had burned me. I broke it. I wailed, shrinking back into my chair, covering my face with my hands. I broke the helper paper. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Michael stared at the ruined document. His face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. He looked like he was going to stroke out. The veins in his neck bulged. He snatched up the torn paper and crumpled it in his fist, throwing it across the room. "You stupid old—" Michael started to scream, raising his hand as if to strike me. "Michael," Sarah yelled, grabbing his arm. "Stop! The doctor is watching." Michael froze. He breathed heavily, his chest heaving. He looked at Dr. Aris, who had stopped writing and was watching the scene with a raised eyebrow. Even for a corrupt doctor, striking a patient was a bridge too far. He is agitated," Michael stammered, lowering his hand. "He gets violent when he's confused. It is clear he cannot execute legal documents tonight," Dr. Aris said, closing his notebook with a snap. "He lacks the capacity to understand what he is signing, and physically he is unable to perform the task. You will not get a valid signature out of him in this state." Sarah looked at the ruined paper on the floor, then at me. Her eyes were cold, dead things. She realized they had lost the night. They wouldn't get the keys to the kingdom today. "Fine," she spat out. "Fine. We'll do it the hard way." She turned to Michael. "Get him out of here. Take him home. We will meet the lawyer at the courthouse at 8 a.m. We will file the emergency motion with the affidavit Aris writes tonight. We don't need his signature if the judge declares him incompetent. We'll just take everything by force." Michael glared at me one last time. He looked defeated, exhausted, and terrifyingly desperate. "Get up, Joseph," he growled. "Party's over." I stood up, keeping my head down, keeping the tremble in my legs. I looked like a man who had been broken. Inside, I was soaring. I had bought myself 12 hours. I had forced them to show their hand, and I had destroyed the only thing that could have given them power over me tonight. I shuffled toward the door, leaving the spilled soup and the torn paper behind me. As I put on my coat, I heard Dr. Aris speaking to Michael in the dining room. "I will write the report immediately. Stage 3 dementia with episodes of aggression. You will have your conservatorship by noon tomorrow." I walked out into the cool night air, the gravel crunching under my feet. I had won the battle, but the war was escalating. They were coming for me in the morning, with the full weight of the law. I climbed into my truck and started the engine. As I pulled away, I let the mask drop. The senile old man vanished. Joseph Bennett, the engineer, the man who built things to last, took the wheel. "See you in court," I whispered. I drove into the darkness, my mind already working on the next step. I needed Richard. I needed to secure the assets, and I needed to prepare the trap that would catch them when they tried to break down my door in the morning. They wanted a fight, I would give them a war. And I had one weapon left that they didn't know about. The truth about who really owned the roof over their heads. Sarah walked me to the front door, her hand gripping my upper arm with a pressure that was less about support and more about restraint. It was the grip of a jailer escorting a prisoner who had just barely failed to escape. The foyer was cold, but the air coming off my daughter was colder. She was vibrating with a mixture of rage and exhaustion. Her plan for a quick surgical strike on my assets had turned into a messy, chaotic failure, and she blamed me for it. She blamed my clumsy hands and my foggy brain, never suspecting that the chaos was a carefully constructed defense mechanism designed by the very man she was trying to destroy. "Do not worry, Dad," she said, her voice tight and clipped like a wire about to snap. "We will fix this tomorrow. The lawyer will have the papers ready at 8. We will come get you. You be ready." I looked at her, letting my head bobble slightly in a nod that was eager to please. 8. I repeated, my voice trembling. 8 is early. I need to have my coffee. "We will bring you coffee," Sarah snapped, opening the heavy front door. "Just be dressed." And do not touch the stove. Do not touch anything. Just sit in your chair and wait for us." I stepped out onto the porch. The night air was biting, a sharp contrast to the stifling heat of the dining room. Michael stood in the hallway behind her, watching me with eyes that were dark with loathing. He didn't say goodbye. He just watched, calculating how much money my accident with the pen had cost him in interest on his gambling debts. "Drive safe, Dad," Sarah said, but it sounded like a curse. "Go straight home. Do not stop." I shuffled down the brick walkway, moving with the slow, deliberate steps of the infirm. I could feel their eyes burning into my back. They were watching to see if I would trip, if I would wander off into the bushes. I gave them what they wanted. I hesitated at the end of the walk, looking left, then right, as if I had forgotten where I parked the truck that was sitting right in front of me. "It is right there, Dad," Sarah called out from the doorway, her patience finally evaporating completely. "The big red truck, right in front of you." "Oh," I mumbled loud enough for them to hear. "Right. The red one." I fumbled with the door handle, letting my hand slip twice before finally pulling it open. I climbed into the cab, hauling myself up with a groan of exertion that was only half faked. The seat was cold, and the smell of old upholstery and engine oil greeted me like an old friend. I sat there for a moment and staring through the windshield at the house. Sarah stood in the doorway, arms crossed, hugging herself against the cold, waiting for me to leave. Waiting for the problem to drive itself away so she could go back inside and plan my demise. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated through the frame. I put it in gear and pulled away slowly, creeping down the long driveway at 10 miles an hour. I watched in the rearview mirror as Sarah watched me go. When I turned onto the street, she finally closed the door. The light from the hallway was cut off, plunging the driveway into darkness. And just like that, the show was over. As soon as I rounded the first bend and the house disappeared behind the line of trees, I let out a breath I felt I had been holding for 3 hours. The transformation was instantaneous. My shoulders, which had been hunched up toward my ears, dropped and broadened. The tremor in my hands, which I had maintained with agonizing discipline, stopped completely. I gripped the steering wheel not with the desperate clutch of a frightened old man, but with the firm, confident hands of a man who knew exactly where he was going. I glanced at the rearview mirror. The face looking back at me was not the vacant, confused visage of Joseph Bennett, the dementia patient. It was the face of Joseph Bennett, the man who had raised a family, buried a wife, and built bridges that spanned raging rivers. My eyes were clear, sharp, and burning with a cold blue fire. "You want to fight, Sarah?" I whispered to the empty cab, my voice deep and steady. "You want to drag me into the mud? Fine. But you forgot one thing. I was born in the mud. I built my way out of it, and I can sure as hell push you back into it." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the digital recorder. I pressed the stop button, ensuring the red light winked out. That little device held the keys to my freedom and their destruction. It held the sound of their betrayal, the audio proof of their conspiracy. I placed it gently on the passenger seat, treating it with the reverence due a loaded weapon. The drive home was a blur of tactical planning. My mind, the engineer's mind, that they thought had rusted shut, was spinning at high velocity. I analyzed the variables. I calculated the load-bearing capacity of their lies. They were banking everything on the emergency hearing tomorrow morning. They needed that conservatorship. They needed the legal authority to seize my accounts and sell my house before the foreclosure on Michael's debt became public. They were desperate, and desperation made people sloppy. I thought about the scene at the table, the way Michael had looked at me when I tore the paper. It wasn't just anger. It was fear. Pure, primal fear. He was a man standing on a trapdoor with a noose around his neck, hoping the lever wouldn't pull. Tomorrow, I was going to pull that lever. I turned onto the highway, merging seamlessly into traffic. The city lights of Boston twinkled in the distance, a sprawling grid of electricity and concrete. Somewhere in that grid, Richard was working. Somewhere in that grid, a paralegal was digging through property records finding the truth about Sarah's house. And somewhere in that grid, the real owner of my home was sleeping soundly, unaware that I was coming for him. I wasn't just going home to hide. I was going home to fortify. I had 12 hours before they came for me. 12 hours to secure the perimeter. 12 hours to turn my modest little house into a fortress of legal and financial impregnability. I thought about the check in my pocket. The $500 I had meant to give Sarah. I reached in and pulled it out. I held it up in the dim light of the dashboard. It seemed so small now, so pathetic. It was a symbol of my naivety, a symbol of the love I had poured into a black hole. I rolled down the window. The wind roared into the cabin loud and cold. I ripped the check in half, then in half again, and again, until it was nothing but confetti. I held my hand out the window and opened my fingers. The pieces of paper were whipped away, instantly swallowed by the night and the slipstream. "Goodbye, Sarah," I said. "Happy birthday." I rolled the window up and pressed down on the accelerator. The truck surged forward. The old man was gone. The victim was gone. The only thing left was the architect of their ruin. And I had a lot of work to do before sunrise. I pulled my truck into the driveway of my small Cape Cod house at exactly 11:15 at night. The street was quiet, the kind of silence that usually brought me peace, but tonight felt heavy with anticipation. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. To the neighbors, I was just old Joe Bennett, coming home late from a family dinner. They saw a man who mowed his own lawn and fixed his own gutters. They had no idea that inside this rusted Ford sat the CEO of Bennett Structural Solutions, a holding company that existed only on paper but carried the weight of a sledgehammer. I got out and walked to the front door. My movements were efficient, stripped of the theatrical frailty I had worn all evening, like a heavy coat. I unlocked the deadbolt, stepped inside, and immediately punched the code into the security panel, hidden behind a landscape painting in the foyer. The system chirped a confirmation. The perimeter was secure. I didn't turn on the main lights. I didn't need to. I knew every inch of this house. I walked straight to my study, a room I kept locked at all times. Inside, it didn't look like a retiree's den. It looked like a command center. I sat down in my leather chair, the one piece of luxury I allowed myself, and placed the digital recorder on the desk. Next to it, I placed my phone. I dialed Richard. He picked up on the first ring, his voice tight with anxiety. "Joseph, thank God. Are you home? Are you alone?" "I am home, Richard," I said. My voice dropping an octave, returning to its natural commanding timbre. "I am secure, and I am done playing games. Did you get out without signing?" "I didn't sign a thing," I replied, a grim smile touching my lips. "Unless you count destroying the document with a fountain pen as signing. They think I am losing my motor functions. They think I am a liability. By tomorrow morning, they will be filing for emergency guardianship." "We have to move fast, Joseph," Richard said, the rustle of papers audible in the background. "If they get a judge to sign that order before we file our motions, they can freeze your personal accounts. They can lock you out of your own life." "Let them try," I said, "but we are going to make sure there is nothing for them to find." "Richard, it is time to activate the contingency plan. Do you have the file for the Catherine Trust?" There was a pause. I could hear Richard's breathing hitch. "The Catherine Trust. We haven't touched that since '98. "Joseph, are you sure that structure was designed to be a ghost? If we activate it, we expose the magnitude of the assets." "Expose it," I commanded. I leaned back, looking at the framed patent on the wall above my desk. U.S. Patent 5402889. a multi-directional seismic dampener for suspension bridges. It was a small, unglamorous piece of engineering, a metal joint that allowed massive structures to sway in an earthquake without snapping. I had invented it 40 years ago. It was currently installed in over 300 bridges across Japan, California, and Chile. Every time a government built a bridge in a seismic zone, they paid a licensing fee to a blind trust in Delaware, a trust that flowed into a shell company in Nevada, which flowed into the Catherine Trust. My family thought I lived on a pension from the city water department. They didn't know that the pension was just a small checking account I used for groceries. They didn't know that the man they were trying to put in a nursing home was sitting on a portfolio of intellectual property and real estate holdings that generated more interest in a month than Michael made in a decade. "Richard, listen to me," I said, my voice hardening. "I want you to execute 3 orders tonight. Write them down." "I am ready, Joseph." "First," I said, "move all liquid assets from my personal checking and savings, the ones Sarah knows about, into the holding company. Leave exactly $100 in the account. When they try to access it tomorrow with their emergency order, I want them to find dust." "Done," Richard said. "I can do the transfer digitally in 5 minutes." "Second," I continued, "I want a forensic title search on Sarah and Michael's house in Wellesley, the one at 124 Crestwood Drive." "Why?" Richard asked. "We know they live there." "We know they live there," I corrected him. "We don't know if they own it. Michael has been forging deeds. I saw evidence tonight that he sold my house out from under me to a shark lender. If he is desperate enough to do that, I don't believe for a second that he actually owns that mansion he struts around in. I want to know who holds the paper. I have a suspicion, Richard. A gut feeling. I will have my title specialist pull the registry records the second the office opens," Richard promised. "No," I said. "Do it now. Use the online portal. Pay the expedited fee. I want that information on my desk before I drink my coffee tomorrow morning." "Understood." "And the third thing, this is the big one, Richard. This is the kill shot." I took a deep breath. I picked up the photo I had taken of Michael's computer screen, the email from Omega Capital, the threat of foreclosure on my home. Michael owes $1.2 million to a hard money lender called Omega Capital. They are threatening to seize my home because he forged a deed, transferring it to himself and used it as collateral. "Jesus," Richard breathed. "Joseph, we can have him arrested for that alone." "Arresting him is too easy," I said coldly. "Prison gives him 3 meals a day and a bed. I want him to feel what it is like to be helpless. I don't want to report him to the police yet." "Then what do you want to do?" "I want to buy the debt," I said. Silence stretched across the line. "Excuse me," Richard asked, his voice stunned. "Contact Omega Capital," I said. "They are sharks. They don't care who pays them. They just want their money. Call them tonight. Tell them you represent an interested party who wants to purchase the distressed note on the Miller debt. Offer them full face value cash, immediate wire transfer." "Joseph, that is over $1 million, Richard warned. "You are going to pay his debt." "I am not paying his debt," I snapped. "I am buying the right to collect it. I want to be the one holding the leash. When I own that note, I become his creditor. I become the bank. And unlike Omega Capital, I am not interested in a payment plan. I am interested in immediate foreclosure." I heard the click of Richard's keyboard. He was already typing. "You want to hold the mortgage on your son-in-law," I clarified. "No," I said. "I want to hold the blade. He tried to sell my house to pay his gambling debts. I am going to take his house, his car, and his dignity to pay mine. Buy the note, Richard. Use the funds from the patent royalties. Have the paperwork ready for me to sign when I walk into your office." "This is ruthless," Richard said, but there was a hint of admiration in his voice. "They wanted to put me in green fields, Richard," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "They wanted me to die in a room that smells of urine so they could turn my home into a studio." Ruthless is a mercy compared to what they deserve. I will get it done, Joseph, Richard said. Stay inside. Lock your doors. If they come before morning, I said, glancing at the security monitor that showed 4 different angles of my property. They will find out that this old engineer still knows how to build a fortress. I hung up the phone. I sat in the silence of my study, surrounded by the physical proof of my life's work. Blueprints, awards, patents. They thought I was a relic. They thought I was debris to be swept away. I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out a fresh file folder. I labeled it The Eviction. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. I checked the locks one last time. Then I went to my bedroom, stripped off the cheap suit I wore to play the part of the poor pensioner, and hung it up. I wouldn't need it anymore. Tomorrow I would wear my best suit. The Italian wool one Catherine had bought me for our 30th anniversary. Tomorrow, Joseph the retiree was dead. Joseph the chairman was taking over. I lay down in bed, but I didn't sleep. I watched the shadows move across the ceiling, counting the hours until sunrise. I was waiting for the phone to ring. I was waiting for Richard to tell me that I owned Michael Miller. And when that call came, the ground beneath their feet would cease to exist. The sun rose over South Boston with a pale, wintry light that offered no warmth, only a harsh, exposing clarity. I was already awake. In fact, I hadn't slept. I stood in my kitchen, the aroma of strong black coffee filling the air, a stark contrast to the lukewarm tap water and plastic cups of the night before. I was not wearing the frayed cardigan and stained trousers of the senile old man. I was dressed in a charcoal gray Italian wool suit, a garment I hadn't worn since I accepted the National Infrastructure Award in D.C. 5 years ago. It fit perfectly. I tightened my tie, a deep crimson silk, and checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. The man looking back wasn't a victim. He was an executioner waiting for the warrant. At exactly 7 a.m., my phone rang. It was Richard. I picked it up before the second ring, my hand steady, my mind sharp as a diamond cutter. "Good morning, Richard," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "Tell me what you found." "Joseph." Richard's voice was breathless, vibrating with a mixture of professional shock and adrenaline. "I have the title report for 124 Crestwood Drive. I had my clerk pull the physical deed from the registry archives just to be sure, because I couldn't believe what I was seeing on the screen." "And?" I asked, though a deep dormant memory was already beginning to stir in the back of my mind. "The property isn't in Michael's name," Richard said. "It never was, and it's not in Sarah's name either. The deed lists the owner as a corporate entity, Catalyst Holdings, LLC. I closed my eyes and let out a long, slow breath. Catalyst Holdings. I hadn't heard that name in 15 years. It was a shell company I had formed in Nevada back in the late 90s, specifically to hold assets that I wanted to keep separate from my main engineering liabilities. "Who is the signatory for Catalyst Holdings, Richard?" I asked, knowing the answer, but needing to hear it said aloud to make it real. "You are," Richard replied, his voice tinged with awe. "It's you, Joseph. You own the house. You have owned it since 2008. The memory flooded back with crystal clarity. 15 years ago, Sarah had come to me pregnant with Mia crying in my kitchen. Michael had blown their savings on a failed restaurant venture. They were facing eviction from their apartment. They needed a home, a stable place to raise my granddaughter. I couldn't just give them cash. I knew Michael would burn through it. So I bought the house in Wellesley. I bought it through the LLC to protect it from Michael's creditors. I told them I had arranged a rental for them through a wealthy client of mine who needed house sitters. I had drafted a lease agreement, a tenancy at will. The rent was set at $1 per year. "I remember now," I said, my voice cold. "I set it up so they would have a roof over their heads. I wanted them to have dignity. I wanted them to feel like it was their home, so I never reminded them. I never checked up on it. I just let them live there." "They forgot," Richard said. "Joseph, they have lived there so long playing the part of the wealthy suburbanites that they actually forgot they don't own the bricks they are standing on. They genuinely believe it is their asset." "They forgot because I allowed them to forget," I corrected him. "I enabled their delusion. I let them play house in my mansion while I lived in a shack, all to protect their fragile egos." The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. Last night in that dining room, Michael had boasted about his real estate ventures while sitting at a table that sat on my floorboards. Sarah had threatened to throw me out of my modest home completely unaware that she was a guest in hers. They were trying to evict the landlord. "What is the status of the lease?" I asked. "It is a standard tenancy at will," Richard explained, the lawyer in him taking over. "Because the rent is nominal $1 a year and there is no fixed term, the law views them essentially as guests. You don't need a complex reason to evict them. You just need to terminate the tenancy." "Draft it," I commanded. "Draft the notice to quit. I want them out. Not in 6 months. Not in 90 days. I want the 30-day notice served today. Cite breach of contract. Cite conduct detrimental to the property owner." "Conduct detrimental?" Richard asked. "That is a bit vague. Attempted kidnapping and fraud against the landlord seems pretty detrimental to me," I snapped. "Just draft it. I want that paper in my hand when they walk into your office." "Understood," Richard said. "And Joseph, the other matter, the debt. Did you buy it?" "Yes. We wired the funds to Omega Capital at 4 a.m. They were happy to unload a distressed asset. We bought the note for 90 cents on the dollar. You are now the sole lien holder on Michael Miller's personal debts. You own the paper on the $1.2 million he owes. Does he know?" "Not yet. Omega Capital agreed to keep the transfer quiet until we notify the debtor. As far as Michael knows, the sharks are still circling. He doesn't know the shark has been replaced by a leviathan." I walked over to the window and looked out at my driveway. The morning was gray and still. "So let me get this straight, Richard. I own the roof over their heads, and I own the debt that is threatening to crush them." "That is correct. You hold all the cards, Joseph. Every single one." "Good," I said. "Because they are coming for me in an hour. They are coming to take a confused old man to a lawyer's office to sign away his freedom. I want you to be ready." "I have a team of paralegals prepping the conference room," Richard said. "We have the eviction notice, the transfer of debt, and the motion to dismiss their conservatorship petition. When they walk in, we will hit them with everything at once." "No," I said. "Not yet. If we hit them now, they might run. They might try to destroy evidence or hide assets I don't know about. I need to get them into that room. I need them to sit down believing they have won. I want to see the look on Michael's face when he realizes the pen he handed me isn't for signing my surrender, but for signing his execution." "What are you going to do?" "I am going to wait for them," I said. "I am going to let them pick me up. I am going to let them drive me to your office. I will play the part one last time. I want them to feel the victory. I want them to taste it. Because it will make the ash taste that much more bitter when I shove it down their throats." "Joseph, that is risky. If they sense anything—" "They won't," I said. "They are blinded by greed. They see what they want to see. They see a payday. They don't see the trap." "All right," Richard sighed. "I will see you at 9. The documents will be ready." I hung up the phone. I went back to my bedroom and looked at the suit I was wearing. It was too nice. It was too sharp. It projected power and competence. If Sarah saw me like this, she would know instantly that the game was up. With a heavy sigh, I took off the Italian jacket. I unknotted the silk tie and draped it over the chair. I went to the closet and pulled out a beige cardigan that had a small coffee stain on the cuff. I put on a pair of slacks that were slightly too short. I mussed my hair, destroying the neat part I had combed in earlier. I looked in the mirror. The CEO vanished. The confused pensioner returned. But this time behind the eyes there was a glint of steel that hadn't been there yesterday. Yesterday I was reacting. Today I was hunting. I went to the living room and sat in my armchair facing the door. I placed my hands on my knees and waited. I reviewed the plan in my head. The house, the debt, the trust, the recordings. It was a perfect storm, and I was the eye. At exactly 8 a.m., a car pulled into the driveway. I watched through the sheer curtains as Michael's Range Rover idled at the curb. He didn't even turn off the engine. He just honked the horn. Once, long and impatient. That honk told me everything. He wasn't here to pick up a father. He was here to pick up a package he intended to deliver to the disposal facility as soon as he had extracted its value. I stood up, adopting the stoop, the shuffle. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. Sarah was in the passenger seat, wearing sunglasses, looking down at her phone. She didn't look up as I locked my door. I walked to the car. I climbed into the back seat. The leather was cold. "Good morning," I mumbled. "Morning," Michael said, looking at me in the rearview mirror. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, a man who was betting everything on a single hand of cards. "You got your ID? You got your glasses?" "I think so." I patted my pockets. "Where are we going again?" "To see a friend, Dad." Sarah said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Just a friend who is going to help us with some paperwork. Don't worry about it." "Okay," I said, looking out the window as we pulled away from the house I owned, driving toward the office where I would end their world. I like visiting friends. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now all I had to do was wait for the snap. The morning light filtered through the dusty blinds of my living room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I sat in my leather recliner, a book open on my lap, though I hadn't read a single word in the last hour. I was watching the street, monitoring the feed from the wireless camera I had installed inside the birdhouse on the front lawn. My phone sat silently on the side table, a loaded weapon waiting for the trigger pull. I knew they wouldn't wait long. The failed attempt to get my signature the night before had surely sent them into a panic. They were desperate, and desperate people do not wait for appointments. They kicked down doors. At 10:30 in the morning, a convoy pulled up to the curb. It wasn't the subtle approach I expected. It was a spectacle. First came Sarah's Mercedes, braking hard. Then a white sedan with the seal of the City of Boston Department of Family Services on the door. And finally a police cruiser, its lights off, but its presence unmistakable. I watched the screen. Sarah got out of her car. She wasn't wearing her usual designer business attire. She was wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt, looking disheveled and frantic, the perfect picture of a daughter at her wit's end. She spoke rapidly to the uniformed officer and a woman in a gray suit carrying a clipboard. She pointed at my house, wiping imaginary tears from her eyes. "Here we go," I whispered to the empty room. I didn't move. I didn't run to the door. I stayed in my chair, letting my head loll slightly to the side, adopting the posture of the confused geriatric. I heard the key turn in the lock. Sarah still had a key. I hadn't changed the locks yet because I needed her to feel she still had access. I needed her to walk into the trap willingly. The door swung open, and Sarah rushed in, breathless. Dad, are you okay?" She spotted me in the chair and let out a dramatic sob, rushing over to kneel beside me. She grabbed my hands, her grip tight and sweaty. "Oh, thank God," she cried loud enough for the people in the hallway to hear. "I was so worried. You didn't answer the phone. I thought you might have fallen." I blinked slowly, looking at her with a dazed expression. "Sarah," I croaked. "Is it Tuesday?" Behind her, the police officer and the social worker stepped into the living room. The officer was young, burly, with a crew cut. He looked uncomfortable. The social worker was middle-aged with tired eyes that scanned the room looking for signs of neglect. "Dad, this is Officer Miller and Miss Perkins," Sarah explained, her voice trembling. "We are all just here to make sure you are safe." I told them about the stove and how you get confused. I looked at the officer. "I didn't touch the stove," I whispered. "I just made tea." "See," Sarah said, turning to the social worker. "He thinks he made tea. The kettle is cold. He hallucinates tasks he hasn't done." Ms. Perkins stepped forward. "Mr. Bennett, my name is Janice. I am with Adult Protective Services. Your daughter filed a report stating you are living in unsafe conditions. We just need to ask you a few questions." I shrank back into the leather chair, pulling my cardigan tighter around me. "I don't want to go," I whimpered. "I like my house." "No one is making you go anywhere just yet, Mr. Bennett," Janice said softly. "We just want to assess the environment." Sarah stood up, wiping her eyes. "I am sorry. I am just a nervous wreck." "Dad, would you like some water? My throat is parched too." "Officer, can I get you anything?" "No, ma'am. I am fine," the officer said. "I will get some water for Dad," Sarah said. She turned and walked into the kitchen. I watched her go. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, not from fear, but from anticipation. I knew exactly what she was doing. The kitchen was visible from my chair through the open archway, but the stove itself was tucked behind the refrigerator wall. She was out of direct line of sight for the officer and the social worker, but I knew my house. I knew the layout, and I knew my daughter. I heard the clink of glasses. I heard the tap run. And then underneath the sound of the rushing water, I heard a faint metallic click. It was the sound of the gas knob being pushed in and turned. It was a distinctive sound, one I had heard thousands of times. Usually it was followed by the rhythmic clicking of the igniter. Click, click, click. Whoosh. But this time there was no clicking, just the soft hiss of gas escaping the burner. She had turned the dial just enough to open the valve, but not far enough to trigger the spark. She walked back into the living room, holding a glass of water. She handed it to me, her hands shaking. "Here, Dad, drink this," she said. She sat down on the ottoman opposite me, blocking my view of the kitchen. She started talking fast, asking Janice about the procedure for emergency placement, filling the air with noise. "So, if you determine he is a danger, can we get him into a facility today?" she asked. "I have a bed reserved at Greenfields, but they need the authorization. We have to evaluate him first." "Mrs. Miller," Janice said, checking boxes on her form. "Can you tell me, Mr. Bennett, do you know who the president is?" I looked at her. I knew who the president was. I knew the vice president. I knew the prime minister of the UK. Eisenhower, I guessed. Janice made a mark on her paper. Sarah let out a sigh of tragic resignation. Suddenly the officer sniffed. He frowned, tilting his head. He sniffed again, louder this time. "Do you smell that?" he asked. "Smell what?" Sarah asked, innocently looking around. "Gas," the officer said. His voice went from casual to command in a split second. "I smell gas." He stood up, hand moving to his radio. "Gas!" Sarah jumped up, feigning panic. "Oh my God, Dad! Did you touch the stove again?" "I didn't move," I whispered, clutching the water glass. The officer rushed into the kitchen. I heard him curse. "Jesus!" he shouted. "The burner is wide open!" He scrambled to turn the knob off. The hiss stopped. He threw open the window above the sink. "Ms. Perkins." "Get them out of here," the officer yelled. "The concentration is high. It could have blown any second." Sarah screamed. A shrill, theatrical sound. She grabbed me, pulling me out of the chair. "He tried to kill us," she wailed, dragging me toward the front door. "He tried to blow us up. I told you he was dangerous." I stumbled. letting her pull me, my legs heavy. We spilled out onto the front lawn. The cold air hit us. Sarah collapsed onto the grass, sobbing hysterically, clinging to the officer's leg as he came out of the house. "He left it on," she cried. "He went into the kitchen before you got here. He said he was making tea. He almost killed us all." The officer looked at me. His face was hard. The sympathy was gone, replaced by the adrenaline of a first responder who had just walked into a bomb. "Sir," he said, walking toward me, "did you turn that stove on?" "I wanted tea." I stammered, my eyes wide. "You endangered everyone in that house," the officer said. "Ma'am, you were right. This is an immediate threat to life and safety." Janice, the social worker, looked shaken. She was staring at the house, then at me. "We can't leave him here," she said, her voice trembling. "This is a Section 12 situation. He is an imminent danger to himself and others. We need to transport him for an emergency psychiatric hold." Section 12. Involuntary commitment. 72 hours in a lockdown ward. Drugged. Sedated. Declared incompetent by default. If they took me now, Sarah would have the keys to the house within the hour. She would find the documents in my study. She would find the recorder. She would burn it all. "No," I said, backing away. "I don't want to go. It is not a choice, sir," the officer said, reaching for his handcuffs. "We are taking you into protective custody. It is for your own good." Sarah looked up from her fake tears. Behind her hands, I saw a flash of a smile, a cold, victorious smirk. She had done it. She had played the ultimate card. She had framed her own father for attempted arson to get a signature on a bank account. "Dad, please just go with them," she pleaded. "Don't make it harder. We just want you safe." The officer's hand closed around my upper arm. The grip was iron. He spun me around, pushing me toward the cruiser. "You have the right to remain silent," he recited the words, automatic. I felt the cold metal of the car against my chest as he pushed me down onto the hood to cuff me. The neighbors were coming out on their porches. Mrs. Gable from across the street was watching her hand over her mouth. To the world, I was a senile pyromaniac, being taken away before I burned the neighborhood down. I had seconds. Once those cuffs clicked shut, once I was in the back of that car, my credibility would be zero. I would just be a raving lunatic. I took a deep breath. The engineer stepped forward. "Officer," I said, my voice suddenly crisp, clear, and devoid of any tremor. "Before you arrest me for a crime I didn't commit, I suggest you look at the grandfather clock in the hallway." The officer paused, the handcuff dangling inches from my wrist. He looked at me, confused by the sudden change in my tone. What he asked? "Thank you so much for being here. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because this story began the moment I picked up that phone and realized something wasn't right." Also, just a quick note. Parts of this story have been lightly dramatized for storytelling and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people or places is purely coincidental, but the message behind it is completely real. "The grandfather clock," I repeated, standing up straight, shaking off his grip with a shrug of my shoulder that surprised him. "There is a camera lens inside the number 6. It is a wide-angle 4K motion-activated security camera, and it points directly into the kitchen." Sarah stopped crying instantly. Her head snapped up. Her face went from tragic to terrified in a heartbeat. "He is lying!" she screamed, scrambling to her feet. "He is crazy. He thinks clocks are watching him. Put him in the car. Check the feed," I said, looking the officer dead in the eye. My voice was the voice that had commanded construction crews of 200 men. My phone is in my right pocket. Unlock code is 1952. The app is called Sentinel. Open it. Look at the clip from 3 minutes ago. The officer looked at me, then at Sarah. Sarah was pale, ghostly white. She lunged for me, trying to grab my pocket. "Don't listen to him. He is delusional." Back off, ma'am, the officer barked, stepping between us. He looked at me with a new expression. Suspicion. But not of me. He reached into my pocket and pulled out the phone. If this is nonsense, sir, I am adding obstruction to your file, he warned. It is not nonsense, I said calmly. He tapped the screen. He entered the code. He opened the app. I watched his eyes scan the video feed. I knew exactly what he was seeing. A high-definition color video of Sarah Miller walking into the kitchen, checking over her shoulder to ensure no one was watching, reaching out, and deliberately turning the gas knob without engaging the igniter. Then walking away with a glass of water and a smile. The officer watched it twice. The silence on the lawn was absolute. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. He slowly lowered the phone. He looked at Sarah. His hand moved away from his handcuffs and rested on his taser. Ma'am, he said, his voice dangerously low. Step away from your father. What? Sarah shrieked, her voice cracking. You can't believe him. It is a deep fake. He tampered with it. Step away, the officer shouted. Janice, the social worker, walked over and looked at the screen. She gasped, covering her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered. She did it. She turned it on. The officer turned to me. Sir, are you pressing charges? I looked at Sarah. She was trembling, vibrating with fear and rage. She looked like a trapped animal. I smoothed my jacket. I adjusted my cuffs. No, officer, I said. Not yet. I don't want her arrested today. Why? The officer asked, stunned. She tried to frame you. She endangered your life. Because I said, looking at my daughter with eyes as cold as the grave. I have a meeting with my lawyer on Friday, and I want her to be there. I want her to be free to come to that meeting. Because jail is too easy. I want to look her in the eye when I take everything she has. I turned to the officer. But I would like you to file a report. Attempted entrapment, fraud, and elder abuse. Keep the video as evidence. The officer nodded slowly. Yes, sir. We can do that. Sarah stood there, frozen. The plan had not just failed. It had exploded in her face. And she knew as she looked into my eyes that the old man she thought she was burying was actually the one holding the shovel. The silence that followed the playing of the video was heavier than the humid air before a storm. The officer held my phone as if it were a grenade that had just had the pin pulled. He didn't hand it back immediately. Instead, he looked at Sarah, and the transformation in his demeanor was terrifying. Minutes ago, he had been her protector, a knight in blue armor ready to save a damsel from a senile father. Now he looked at her with the cold, hard glare reserved for criminals who waste police time and endanger lives. Ms. Perkins, the social worker, stepped closer, peering over the officer's shoulder to watch the footage again. I saw her face pale. She brought a hand to her chest, a gesture of genuine shock. She saw the calculation in Sarah's movements. She saw the check over the shoulder. She saw the deliberate twist of the wrist. It wasn't the action of a concerned daughter getting water. It was the action of a saboteur laying a trap. You used us, the officer said. His voice was quiet, barely a whisper, but it carried across the lawn like a crack of thunder. You called 911. You filed a false report. You dragged a social worker out here. You tried to weaponize the state against your own father. Sarah took a step back. Her heels sank into the soft grass, making her stumble. The mask of the grieving, worried daughter had completely disintegrated, leaving behind something raw and ugly. Panic. It's not what it looks like, she stammered, her eyes darting between the officer, the social worker, and me. He must have edited it. He's an engineer. He knows about computers. He made it look like that, ma'am. Stop. The officer snapped. Just stop. That is a time-stamped cloud-based security feed. You can't fake that in 3 minutes standing on a front lawn. He took a step toward her, his hand resting instinctively on his belt. You endangered this entire neighborhood. If that gas had ignited, do you have any idea the level of negligence we are talking about? Sarah looked at the handcuffs hanging from his belt. The same handcuffs she had begged him to put on me just moments ago. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The narrative had flipped. She wasn't the hero of this story anymore. She was the villain, and the walls were closing in. I watched her unravel. I remembered teaching her to ride a bike on this very lawn. I remembered holding the back of the seat, promising I wouldn't let go. Now I was watching her drown, and I kept my hands in my pockets. I am not pressing charges today, I repeated, my voice cutting through her panic. I want her at the lawyer's office on Friday. But officer, I want her off my property. Now. The officer nodded, turning his full attention to Sarah. You heard him. You are trespassing. Get in your car and leave. If you come back here, if you call him, if you drive past this house, I will arrest you for harassment and reckless endangerment. Do you understand? Sarah looked at me one last time. There were no tears now. Just a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. She realized she had underestimated me. She realized the old man she thought was senile had just outmaneuvered her entire generation. You think you won, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. You're all alone, Dad. You have no one. I looked at her standing tall in my suit, the master of my domain. I would rather be alone than with a snake, I said. She turned and ran. She didn't walk. She ran to her Mercedes, fumbling with her keys, dropping them once in the grass before snatching them up. She threw herself into the driver's seat and slammed the door. The engine roared, and she reversed out of the driveway with a screech of tires that left black marks on the asphalt. We watched her speed away, a fleeing criminal in a luxury car. When she was gone, the tension on the lawn dissipated, replaced by an awkward, heavy shame. The officer turned to me. He held out my phone. Mr. Bennett, I don't know what to say, he said, removing his cap and running a hand through his hair. I almost took you in. I am so sorry. You were doing your job, son, I said, taking the phone. She is very convincing. She has been practicing that performance for a long time. Ms. Perkins was wiping her eyes. I am so sorry, Mr. Bennett. In 20 years of social work, I have never seen a child try to frame a parent like that. It is monstrous. It is greed, I said simply. Greed makes monsters of us all if we let it. I looked at the officer. I need to formalize this. I cannot have her coming back tonight to try again. She is desperate, and desperate people escalate. I want to file for an emergency restraining order. Immediate effect. The officer nodded vigorously. Absolutely. Given the video evidence and the attempted arson, I can call the judge on duty right now. We can get an emergency protective order issued within the hour. It will bar her from coming within 500 feet of you or this property. If she violates it, it is mandatory arrest. No questions asked. Do it, I said. And include her husband, Michael Miller. He is the architect of this. She is just the demolition crew. I will put it all in the report, the officer promised. I will upload the video evidence from your phone to our server right now if you allow it. Please, I said. We stood on the porch while he made the call. I watched the neighborhood. Mrs. Gable was still watching from across the street. I gave her a small wave. She waved back, looking confused but relieved that I wasn't in the back of the cruiser. 20 minutes later, the paperwork was done. The officer handed me a slip of paper with a case number. The order is active, Mr. Bennett. We will serve them at their residence within the hour. You are safe. Thank you, I said. They walked to their cars. Ms. Perkins stopped halfway down the path and turned back. Mr. Bennett, she asked. Yes, you are not senile, are you? She asked, a small smile touching her lips. I smiled back, the first genuine smile I had felt in days. Ms. Perkins, I built the bridge you probably drive over to get to work. I haven't lost a step. I just stopped walking for a while to let them think they could catch up." She laughed a sound of relief and got into her car. I watched them drive away. The street was quiet again. I was alone. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation began to ebb, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. But it was a good kind of tired. It was the tiredness of a man who has reinforced the walls and secured the gates. I walked back into my house and locked the door. I went to the kitchen. The window was still open, letting in the cold air to clear the gas smell. I closed it. I looked at the stove. The knob was in the off position. I went to my study and sat in the leather chair. I picked up the phone and dialed Richard. "It is done," I said when he answered. "She tried to frame me for arson. The police have the video. There is a restraining order out for both of them." "Good God, Joseph," Richard breathed. "They actually tried it. They tried it. And they failed. Now, Richard, I need you to set the stage for Friday. I want them to come to your office. I want them to think I am there to negotiate a surrender. I want them to think the restraining order is just a bargaining chip. They will be terrified, Joseph. A restraining order means they can't get near you." "Exactly. That is why they will come to the meeting. It is their only channel left. Tell their lawyer I am willing to drop the order and discuss a settlement if they show up in person." "You are going to lure them in," Richard said. "I am not luring them," I said, looking at the file folder on my desk labeled "The Eviction." "I am inviting them to their own funeral. Make the call, Richard. Tell them I am ready to talk. Tell them I am tired and I just want this to end." It wasn't a lie. I was tired. And I did want it to end. But the ending I had written was very different from the one they were expecting. I hung up the phone. I looked at the picture of Catherine on my desk. "We did good, Katie," I whispered. "We raised a wolf, but we didn't raise a fool." I closed the file. The trap was primed. The legal noose was tied. Now all I had to do was wait for Friday. Wait for the moment when I would walk into that conference room and pull the floor out from under the people who had tried to bury me. 2 days later, I stood in the hallway outside the main conference room of Powell and Associates. The frosted glass wall allowed me to see the silhouettes of the people waiting inside. Sarah was pacing back and forth, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, a posture of defensive aggression. Michael was slumped in a chair, tapping his foot with a nervous rhythm that vibrated through the floor. They looked like people waiting for a bus, not people facing their doom. They still believed they had leverage. They thought the restraining order was a tantrum, a desperate flailing of an old man who had been cornered. They had come here expecting to accept my apology, and perhaps, if they were feeling generous, allow me to move into a slightly nicer room at the nursing home in exchange for signing over my assets. I adjusted my crimson silk tie in the reflection of the glass. I smoothed the lapels of my charcoal Italian wool suit. I checked my watch. It was a Patek Philippe, another secret indulgence I had kept hidden in a safety deposit box for a decade. It was exactly 10 o'clock. "Time to demolish the building," I whispered. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped into the room. The air conditioning was humming, but the silence that fell when I entered was colder. Sarah stopped pacing. Michael stopped tapping. They both looked up, their mouths opening to deliver whatever rehearsed scolding they had prepared. But the words died in their throats. They were looking for the shuffling cardigan, wearing confused pensioner they had bullied at dinner. They were looking for a victim. Instead, they found a CEO. I walked to the head of the long oval table, moving with the fluid, powerful stride of a man in his prime. I pulled out the leather chair and sat down. Not with a groan, but with a deliberate, controlled grace. I placed a single manila folder on the table in front of me. I didn't look at them. I looked at Richard, who was sitting to my right, calm and professional as an undertaker. "Good morning, Richard," I said, my voice deep and resonant, filling the room without effort. Shall we begin? Michael stared at me, blinking rapidly, as if his brain couldn't process the visual data. He looked at my suit. He looked at the watch on my wrist, which cost more than his car. He looked at my eyes, which held no fog, no confusion, only a terrifying clarity. Joseph. Michael stammered, his voice weak. What is this? You look different. I look like myself. Michael, I replied, cold and sharp. The man you met the other night. That was a character. You didn't like the script, so I rewrote it. Sarah stepped forward, her face flushing with anger and confusion. Dad, stop this acting. The police report the restraining order. It is ridiculous. We know you are sick. We are here to help you, but you have to drop this nonsense. We can't help you if you keep attacking us. I turned my head slowly to look at her. It wasn't a look of anger. It was a look of absolute indifference. Sit down, Sarah, I commanded. The authority in my voice was absolute. It was the voice I used to order the evacuation of a collapsing tunnel. It wasn't a request. She sat. She didn't want to, but her body obeyed the command before her mind could protest. We are not here to discuss my health, I said. We are here to discuss your eviction. Michael let out a short, incredulous laugh. Eviction, Dad. You don't even know where you live half the time. You can't evict anyone. We are here to discuss the conservatorship. Our lawyer is on his way, and your lawyer isn't coming. Richard cut in smoothly. I spoke to him 10 minutes ago, when I sent over the evidence of the attempted entrapment and the video of the gas stove incident. He recused himself. He doesn't want to be disbarred for aiding in a criminal conspiracy. You are unrepresented, Michael. Michael paled. He looked at the empty chair where his legal shield was supposed to be. Now about the eviction. Richard continued, sliding a document across the polished mahogany table. It stopped right in front of Michael. This is a notice to quit. Richard explained. It effectively terminates the tenancy at will agreement for the property located at 124 Crestwood Drive. Michael looked at the paper but didn't touch it. What are you talking about? That is my house. I own it. I have the deed. You have a forgery, Richard corrected him. A clumsy one at that. The actual deed, the one on file with the Registry of Deeds, lists the owner as Catalyst Holdings, LLC. So what? Michael snapped, trying to regain his footing. That is some investment firm. I pay them rent. I have an arrangement. Yes, you do have an arrangement, I said, leaning forward, interlacing my fingers. You have an arrangement with the sole managing member of Catalyst Holdings. Michael looked at me. He looked at Richard, then back at me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His eyes widened until the whites showed all around. You, he whispered. You own the house. I bought it 15 years ago, I said, my voice devoid of mercy, when you were broke and Sarah was pregnant. I set up the LLC to protect it from your incompetence. I gave you a lease for $1 a year so you could feel like a man. I let you live there. I let you raise my granddaughter there. And how did you repay me? You tried to sell it out from under me to a loan shark. Michael shrank in his chair. He looked small. He looked like a child caught stealing from the collection plate. I didn't sell it, he stammered. I needed a bridge loan. I was going to pay it back. You forged a deed transfer, I said. That is a felony, Michael, but I am not sending you to jail for that. Not yet. Sarah was staring at me, her mouth agape. You own our house. You have millions of dollars in property, and you let us struggle. You let us worry about money. I let you live rent-free for 15 years. I snapped, my voice cracking like a whip. I paid your tuition. I paid your credit cards. I covered your mistakes. And you call that struggle? You have never struggled a day in your life, Sarah. But that changes today. Richard slid another document across the table. This one was thicker bound in blue legal paper. The notice to quit gives you 30 days to vacate, Richard said. However, given the hostile actions taken against the landlord, specifically the attempt to have him institutionalized, we are filing for an accelerated eviction based on nuisance and danger to the property owner. You have 7 days. 7 days, Sarah shrieked. We can't move in 7 days. Where will we go? That is not my concern, I said. You have a Mercedes. You can sleep in that. Michael was shaking his head, muttering to himself. This can't be happening. This isn't real. Omega Capital. They won't let you do this. They have a lien. Ah, yes. Richard said, a shark-like smile spreading across his face. Omega Capital. We should talk about them. He pulled the final document from his briefcase. He placed it gently in front of Michael. It was a transfer of note and lien. Omega Capital was very happy to do business with us, Richard said. They were quite worried about the default status of your loan, Michael. $1.2 million is a lot of bad debt to carry. So when Joseph offered to buy the note for cash, they accepted immediately. Michael looked at the document. He read the header. Assignee Joseph Bennett. I watched the color drain from his face until he was gray. He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw genuine terror. He wasn't looking at a father-in-law anymore. He was looking at his executioner. You bought my debt, he rasped. I own you, Michael, I said softly. I am the bank. I am the collection agency. And I am the foreclosure court. You owe me $1.2 million, plus interest, plus penalties, and unlike Omega Capital, I am not interested in a payment plan. I stood up, towering over them. I am calling the note I declared. The full amount is due immediately. Michael slumped forward, putting his head in his hands. He began to sob dry, hacking sounds of a man whose life has just been incinerated. Please, he choked out. Please, Joseph. I can't pay that. I don't have it. I know, I said. That is why I am taking everything else. I am taking the cars. I am garnishing your future wages. I am seizing your bank accounts. I am going to strip you down to the studs, Michael. By the time I am done, you won't even be able to afford a plastic spoon. Sarah stood up, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. Dad, please, she begged, reaching out a hand. You can't do this. We are your family. We made a mistake. We are sorry. Please don't destroy us. I looked at her hand, the hand that had turned the gas knob, the hand that had signed the petition to lock me away. You tried to bury me, Sarah. I said, my voice cold and final. You dug a grave for me in a place that smells of urine and death. You stood on my front lawn and tried to have me arrested. You stopped being my family the moment you decided my life was less valuable than your lifestyle. I picked up my folder. I turned to Richard. File the papers, I said. Start the eviction. Execute the lien. I walked toward the door, not looking back at the two weeping figures at the table. They were strangers to me now. Just tenants who had overstayed their welcome. Dad, Sarah screamed behind me, a raw sound of total loss. I paused at the door, my hand on the handle. I didn't turn around. You have 7 days, I said. Don't scratch the floors on your way out. I walked out of the conference room and into the hallway. I felt lighter than I had in 20 years. The bridge was burned. The demolition was complete. Now I could finally start building something new. The air in the conference room seemed to be sucked out by the gravity of the document sitting on the table. Michael stared at the transfer of debt, his eyes locked on the figure $1.2 million. He looked at the signature line where the assignee was listed. Joseph Bennett. He looked at me, and the arrogance that had defined him for the 10 years I had known him evaporated like mist in a furnace. He wasn't the master of the universe anymore. He was a man who had gambled with money he didn't have and lost to the one man he couldn't bluff. He made a sound, a low, strangled whimper that was pathetic, coming from a grown man. Then he did something that made my stomach turn. He slid out of his chair. He didn't stand up. He slid down his knees, hitting the expensive carpet with a heavy thud. He crawled around the edge of the table, ignoring Richard, ignoring his wife, until he was right in front of me. He reached out, grabbing the hem of my trousers with shaking hands. "Joseph, please," he begged, his voice cracking, tears streaming down his face. "You can't do this. I don't have it. You know I don't have it. If you call this note, they will take everything. They will take my business accounts. They will take my pension fund." I looked down at him. I pulled my leg back, dislodging his grip. I didn't want him touching the Italian wool. "You don't have a business, Michael," I said, my voice flat and unyielding. "You have a shell company you use to launder loan proceeds into crypto wallets. And you don't have a pension fund. You liquidated that 3 years ago to pay off a bookie in Atlantic City. I know because I read your bank statements while you were eating steak and handing me a plastic spoon." Michael froze. The realization that I had seen everything, that there were no secrets left, crushed him. He slumped forward, his forehead touching the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. "I will work," he gibbered into the carpet. "I will get a job. I will pay you back every cent. I swear it. Just give me time. Don't take the house. Don't take the cars. You are going to work," I agreed, "for the rest of your life. But not to pay me back. You are going to work to survive. Because as of this moment, your credit score is 0. Your assets are frozen. And your reputation is dead." Sarah had been watching this spectacle in stunned silence, her mouth agape. Seeing her husband, the man she had conspired with, groveling on the floor, seemed to snap something inside her. She didn't drop to her knees. She stood up, her face twisting into a mask of righteous indignation. She rushed around the table, not to comfort Michael, but to confront me. "Stop it!" she screamed, slamming her hands onto the table. "Stop it right now. Look at what you are doing to him. You are enjoying this." I looked at her calmly. "I am not enjoying it, Sarah. I am executing a contract, something you and your husband seem to have trouble honoring." "You are a monster," she shrieked, tears of rage spilling over. "We are your family. How can you be so cold? We are your flesh and blood. Doesn't that mean anything to you? You are supposed to protect us." She was playing the last card in her deck. The blood card. The guilt card. It was the card she had used for 40 years to get what she wanted. The tuition, the down payments, the bailouts. She thought it was an ace, Mo. She didn't realize I had removed it from the deck. I stood up slowly, leaning forward, until my face was inches from hers. I let the silence stretch, letting the weight of her accusation hang in the air. "Flesh and blood," I repeated softly. "Yes," she cried, thinking she had found a crack in my armor. "I am your daughter. I am your blood. You can't destroy your own blood." I looked her dead in the eye. My gaze didn't waver. "Sarah," I said, my voice low and terrifyingly calm. "Cancer is also flesh and blood. It is made of the body's own cells. It shares the same DNA. It feeds on the same blood supply. But when a tumor starts to consume the host, when it starts to kill the body that created it, you don't nurture it. You don't protect it because it is family. You cut it out. You radiate it. You kill it before it kills you." Sarah recoiled as if I had slapped her. Her face went pale, her eyes wide with shock. You are calling me cancer," she whispered. "I am calling you a liability," I said. "You tried to institutionalize me. You tried to steal my identity. You tried to frame me for arson. You are a malignancy in my life, Sarah. And today is surgery day." I turned away from her, breaking the connection. I looked at Richard. He was holding a pen, his expression solemn. He knew what was coming. He pushed the final document toward me. It was the writ of execution, the legal order that would allow the sheriff to seize their personal property to satisfy the judgment of the debt. It was the document that would put padlocks on their doors and tow trucks in their driveway. "Give me the pen," I said. "Dad, no." Sarah screamed, lunging for the paper. Michael scrambled up from the floor, his eyes wild. "Joseph, don't. We will do anything. We will sign the papers you want. Just don't sign that." Richard stood up, blocking Sarah's path with his shoulder. "Sit down, Mrs. Miller," he warned, "or I will call security." I didn't look at them. I looked at the paper. I thought about the plastic cup. I thought about the forged deed. I thought about the years of lies. I took the heavy fountain pen from Richard. It was a Mont Blanc, balanced and precise. Unlike the one Michael had forced into my hand 2 nights ago, this one felt right. I uncapped it. The nib was gold and sharp. "You wanted a signature, Michael?" I asked without looking up. "You wanted Joseph Bennett to sign a paper so badly. Well, here it is." I pressed the nib to the paper. I didn't shake. I didn't hesitate. I signed my name in bold, flowing script. Joseph Edward Bennett. The ink glistened black and permanent. "It is done," I said, capping the pen with a decisive click. I handed the document back to Richard. "File it. Call the sheriff. I want the locks changed by sundown." Michael stared at the paper as if it were a death warrant. He made a sound like a balloon deflating, all the fight leaving his body. He collapsed back into his chair, staring at nothing. Sarah was sobbing now, a raw, ugly sound of total defeat. She looked at me, her eyes pleading one last time. "Where will we go?" she wept. "We have nowhere to go." I adjusted my cuffs. I checked my watch. "You have a checking account with about $400 in it," I said. "And you have a Mercedes that is paid up until the end of the month. I suggest you find a motel that accepts cash. Or perhaps you can check into Green Fields. I hear they have beds available." I walked past them. I didn't look back. I could hear Sarah weeping, calling out my name, but the sound was distant, like a radio playing in another room. I walked out of the conference room and into the lobby. The air was cool and clean. I took out my phone and dialed a number. "Hello," a young voice answered. "Mia," I said, my voice softening for the first time in days. "It is Grandpa." "Grandpa, are you okay? Mom and Dad are freaking out. They said you were meeting a lawyer." "I am fine, Mia. Listen to me. I need you to pack a bag. Just your essentials. Your computer, your clothes, your school books." "Why? What is happening?" "Your parents are going to be going away for a while," I said gently. "There is a car coming to pick you up in 20 minutes. It is a friend of mine. He is going to bring you to my house. Your house, but I am setting up the guest room for you, Mia. It is going to be your studio, high-speed internet soundproofing, whatever you need. You are going to live with me for a while." "Really?" she asked, her voice small. "You aren't mad at me for what I said at dinner?" "No, honey," I said. "You told the truth. That is all I ever wanted. Just be ready." I hung up. I walked out of the building and into the sunlight. The city looked different today. Brighter. Sharper. I was 71 years old, and I had just dismantled my old life to build a new foundation. It was terrifying. It was tragic. But it was solid. And for the first time in a long time, it was mine. The deadline expired at 8 in the morning on a Friday, exactly 7 days after the meeting in Richard's office. I did not go inside the house at 124 Crestwood Drive. I sat in my car parked down the street, watching the finale of the tragedy my daughter had written for herself. It was a spectacle of absolute humiliation. 2 sheriff's deputies stood by the front door, arms crossed and faces impassive, as a crew of court-appointed movers carried boxes out to the curb. They were not careful. They dumped designer clothes, expensive electronics, and pieces of art onto the wet grass like refuse. Michael was the first to emerge. He was screaming at a tow truck driver who was hooking up his beloved Range Rover. He looked disheveled, unshaven, a man who had not slept in a week. When the truck pulled away, dragging his status symbol with it, he collapsed onto the driveway, sitting in the oil stain left behind. He looked like a child whose toy had been snatched away. Then came Sarah. She walked out holding a single box of personal items. She was wearing sunglasses, likely to hide eyes swollen from crying, but they could not hide the shame radiating off her in waves. The neighbors, the people she had tried so hard to impress with her garden parties and her lies, were watching from their windows and driveways. She saw them. She saw Mrs. Higgins from next door shaking her head. She saw the judgment. She lowered her head and walked quickly to the curb where a taxi was waiting. She didn't look back at the house. She didn't look for me. She got in, and the car drove away, leaving her husband sitting on the asphalt, amidst the wreckage of his life. I watched until Michael finally stood up, grabbed 2 suitcases, and began the long walk down the street toward the bus stop. The house stood empty, silent and reclaimed. I signaled to the contractor I had waiting in his van. He would go in, change the locks, and board up the windows until I decided whether to sell it or burn it down. The demolition was finished. 3 months later, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment on the 25th floor of the Harbor View Towers. The wind off the Atlantic was brisk and salty, carrying the scent of the ocean and the city below. The view was magnificent. From here, the problems of the world looked small, like toy cars moving in a model city. I held a crystal glass in my hand, heavy and perfectly balanced. Inside swirled a vintage Bordeaux, a 1982 Chateau Margaux. I took a sip, savoring the complex notes of earth and fruit. It tasted nothing like the lukewarm water from a plastic sippy cup. It tasted like victory. Inside the apartment, I could hear the faint sound of music. Mia was in her room, the guest suite I had converted into a state-of-the-art recording studio. She was safe. She was thriving. I had set up an irrevocable educational trust for her managed by Richard. Her tuition was paid through her doctorate if she chose to go that far. She visited her parents occasionally at the motel where they were staying, but she always came back here. She told me they were still blaming everyone but themselves, still waiting for the world to apologize to them. They would wait forever. I leaned against the railing, looking out at the horizon. I was 71 years old. I had lost a daughter, but I had regained my life. I had cut out the rot, and the structure was standing stronger than ever. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a notification from my travel agent. The itinerary for my trip to Italy was confirmed. First class. 5-star hotels. No more hiding. No more pretending to be poor to test the loyalty of wolves. I took another sip of wine. I thought about the doctor's note. Run, he had said. And I had run. I had run straight through the fire and came out the other side forged in steel. I am not alone, I whispered to the wind. I am free. I drained the glass, set it down on the table, and walked back inside, closing the door on the cold. The apartment was warm. The lights were bright. And for the first time in 40 years, I didn't have to worry about anyone turning them off. I learned that family is not defined by DNA, but by loyalty, respect, and genuine care. For 40 years, I sacrificed my dignity on the altar of parenthood, believing that enabling my daughter's greed was an act of love. It wasn't. It was an act of fear. I was afraid to be alone. But standing here looking at the ocean, I realized that solitude is not the same as loneliness. Solitude is peace. Loneliness is being surrounded by people who view you as a resource to be mined rather than a person to be cherished. It is never too late to reclaim your life, to set boundaries, and to demand the respect you deserve. If they cannot give you that, then you must have the courage to show them the door. Looking back now, I see my own mistakes clearly. I confused sacrifice with love, silence with strength, and tolerance with wisdom. This family story didn't begin with betrayal. It began with my fear of setting boundaries. If I can offer one piece of advice, it's this: don't wait until respect is gone to demand it. Learn from my dad revenge not as an act of anger, but as a warning of what happens when kindness is endlessly exploited. I don't tell this family story to glorify punishment. I tell it because God teaches us that truth matters, dignity matters, and no one parent or child has the right to destroy another soul for comfort or greed. God gave me life wisdom and the strength to stand when I was pushed to the ground. And God reminded me that justice does not require cruelty, only courage. This dad revenge is also a reminder that survival sometimes looks like confrontation. This family story proves that protecting yourself is not betrayal, it is responsibility. What happened to me wasn't about revenge for pleasure. This dad revenge was about reclaiming my life when everything was taken from me. Before we part, I'd love to hear from you. Do you believe I did the right thing? Please leave a comment, share this story with someone who might need it, and subscribe to the channel if stories like this matter to you. Your support keeps these conversations alive. Thank you sincerely for staying with me until the very end. And please note, the next story includes some fictional elements created for educational purposes. If this isn't for you, feel free to exit and choose content better suited to you.